I drove to my son's first day at his father-in-law's company expecting to celebrate his promotion to operations manager. Instead, I found him unloading heavy cargo trucks in the brutal July heat while his wife and her father laughed from the shade. They told me he needed to learn his place at the bottom of society. I did not scream or argue. I just looked at my boy, walked back to my car, and made a single phone call that would collapse their entire empire overnight. What happened next changed everything. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to people who underestimated your worth and tried to break your family. My name is Martin Pierce. I am 69 years old, and for my entire life I believed that hard work and quiet dignity were the ultimate shields against a cruel world. I was wrong. Sometimes dignity requires you to burn the world down. The July sun beat down on the sprawling asphalt lot of Thorn Logistics like a physical weight. The heat waves distorted the air above the pavement. I parked my reliable 10-year-old pickup truck near the visitor entrance. In the passenger seat sat a silver thermos of iced tea and a box of premium cigars I had bought to celebrate. Today was supposed to be a milestone. My son Derek, 32 years old and armed with a master's degree in supply chain management, was officially starting his new role as operations manager. He had married Megan Thorne 2 years ago. I had my reservations about her family, especially her father Gregory, who wore his generational wealth like a weapon. But Derek believed this job was his breakthrough. I stepped out of the air-conditioned truck into the suffocating 100-degree heat. I walked toward the main administrative building, expecting to find Derek in a crisp suit behind a glass desk. Instead, a harsh metallic clatter drew my attention to the loading docks at the far end of the facility. I squinted against the glaring sun. A lone figure was wrestling with a massive wooden crate on the edge of a flatbed trailer. He was shirtless, his dark skin slick with heavy sweat, his shoulders trembling under the sheer weight of what looked like a 110-pound industrial container. My chest tightened. I recognized that posture. It was my son. Derek dropped the crate onto a wooden pallet with a heavy thud. He leaned against the metal railing, gasping for air, his face completely drained of color. He was not managing operations. He was performing brutal manual labor in an asphalt inferno. I walked toward the loading dock, my boots hitting the pavement with a heavy, deliberate rhythm. The closer I got, the more the scene turned my stomach. Just 20 yards away from where my son was breaking his back, a large white pop-up tent provided deep shade. Underneath it stood Gregory Thorne, dressed in a pristine linen suit and holding an insulated tumbler of ice water. Next to him stood Megan, my daughter-in-law, wearing a designer sundress and oversized sunglasses. They were surrounded by 3 white warehouse supervisors. They were not working. They were watching Derek and laughing. I approached the tent. Gregory noticed me first. He did not lose his arrogant smirk. He took a slow sip of his water and looked me up and down. "Martin," he said, his voice loud enough to echo across the concrete, "you are just in time to see the new boy earn his keep." I stared at him, my expression completely flat. "I was told Derek was hired as the operations manager." Gregory let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "Operations manager? Please, a fancy degree does not change what people are fundamentally built for. Your boy lacks the pedigree for leadership. I put him where he belongs. Unloading trucks builds character. It reminds people like him of their natural place in the food chain." I shifted my gaze to Megan. She was sipping from her own cup, looking completely unbothered by her father insulting her husband. "Megan," I said evenly, "is this what you call a promotion?" She lowered her sunglasses, her blue eyes devoid of any warmth or empathy. "Do not overreact, Martin. My father is doing Derek a favor. He needs to know his place and learn from the very bottom of society. If he cannot handle a little hard work, then he is just as useless as my father warned me he was." The supervisors chuckled softly. They stood there, a unified front of privilege and prejudice, completely confident that they held all the power. They looked at me as an old, powerless black man who had overstepped his bounds by daring to question their authority. I did not yell. I did not curse. Decades of surviving in a world designed to break me had taught me that explosive anger is exactly what people like Gregory want. It allows them to paint you as erratic and unreasonable. True power is perfectly silent. I turned away from the tent and walked directly toward the loading dock. Derek looked up. Our eyes met. His face was a mask of pure humiliation and physical exhaustion. He wiped the sweat from his forehead with the back of a blistered, bleeding hand. His eyes filled with tears shining clearly in the harsh sunlight. He opened his mouth to speak, perhaps to apologize, perhaps to beg me not to make a scene. He was terrified of losing the life he thought he was building with Megan. I did not say a single word. I simply looked into my son's eyes, conveying a message only a father and son could understand. I reached out, placed my hand firmly on his trembling, sweat-soaked shoulder, and gave it a single reassuring squeeze. Then I turned my back on him. I turned my back on Gregory. I turned my back on Megan. I walked away with measured, unhurried steps. Gregory called out behind me, his voice dripping with triumphant venom. "That is right, Martin. Walk away. Teach him how to accept reality." I did not look back. The silence I left in my wake was heavy and absolute. I reached my truck, opened the door, and slid into the driver's seat. The heat trapped inside the cabin was intense, but my mind was completely cold. I closed the door, sealing out the noise of Thorn Logistics. I pulled my cell phone from my pocket and dialed a number I had kept on speed dial for years. It was answered on the second ring. Jonathan. I said, my voice steady and devoid of emotion. "I need you to execute an immediate financial freeze." On the other end, my financial manager paused, sensing the gravity in my tone. "What exactly are we freezing, Martin?" "Everything related to Derek and Megan," I replied. "I want you to cut the cord today. Cancel the $15,000 monthly credit line I have been secretly using to guarantee their luxury mortgage. Block the auto payments on her premium car lease. Stop the deposits to their joint checking account. Lock it all down." Jonathan cleared his throat. "Martin, if I do this without warning, they will default on their mortgage by next week. Their credit cards will bounce by tonight. They will be completely exposed." "That is the point, Jonathan," I said, staring through the windshield at the distant white tent where Gregory and Megan were still laughing. "For 2 years, I have secretly funded their lavish lifestyle to protect my son's pride in front of that arrogant family. I bought the illusion of their success. The illusion ends today. Let them survive on their own." I hung up the phone, started the engine, and drove away from the asphalt inferno. The war had officially begun, and they had absolutely no idea who they had just provoked. Derek dragged himself up the paved walkway of his sprawling suburban home at 8 in the evening. Every muscle in his body screamed in agony. His hands, usually accustomed to typing on a keyboard and handling paperwork, were now covered in raw, burst blisters from moving heavy freight for 10 hours straight. The July heat had baked the exhaustion deep into his bones. He fumbled with his keys, leaving small smears of blood on the brass door handle. He just wanted a hot shower, a cold drink, and a moment of silence to process the utter humiliation of his first day. But the second he pushed the heavy oak door open, the illusion of peace shattered instantly. Megan was standing in the center of the grand foyer, her face flushed with a furious, ugly shade of red. She was clutching her platinum credit card in one hand and her smartphone in the other. She did not ask how his first day went. She did not look at his bleeding hands or his sweat-stained shirt. Instead, she threw her phone onto the glass console table with a sharp crack. "Derek, what is going on with our accounts?" she shrieked, her voice echoing harshly off the high ceilings. "I just tried to check out an online cart for the upcoming charity gala, and my card was declined." Declined Derek. 3 times. I even tried to use the backup card for the country club fees, and the bank locked me out of the portal. It says the line of credit has been frozen. Derek blinked, his exhausted mind struggling to process her frantic words. "Frozen. That is impossible. I just checked the balances last week. We had plenty of room." He dropped his heavy leather bag, his shoulders slumping under an invisible weight. "Let me call the bank right now. It has to be a fraud alert or a system error." Megan crossed her arms, her blue eyes narrowing into cold slits. It had better be a mistake. "Do you have any idea how humiliating it is to have a card declined? If my friends find out about this, we will be the laughingstock of the entire neighborhood. Fix it right now." Derek pulled out his phone and dialed the automated banking service, putting it on speaker so they could both hear. He punched in his account numbers with trembling, blistered fingers. The robotic voice that answered delivered a swift, brutal execution to the life he thought he owned. "We are sorry. The primary guarantor on this account has revoked authorization. Your current available balance is negative $400. Due to insufficient funds, the pending mortgage payment of $7,000 has been returned." Derek felt the floor drop beneath him. The primary guarantor. He stared at the phone in pure shock, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. For 2 years, he believed his impressive salary and his carefully managed investments were keeping them afloat in this luxury estate. He believed he was providing for his wife, standing shoulder to shoulder with her wealthy family. But in that crushing moment of silence, the truth finally hit him. The math suddenly made perfect sense. His father, Martin, his quiet, unassuming father who lived in a modest house on the other side of town, had been the invisible safety net all along. Martin had been secretly funneling $15,000 a month into a ghost account to guarantee Derek's mortgage, cover Megan's luxury car lease, and pad their credit limits. Martin had bought his son's dignity so Derek would never have to feel inferior around Gregory Thorne. And today, after witnessing his son being treated like a pack mule on the blazing asphalt, Martin had pulled the plug. The facade was completely gone. The fake wealth evaporated into thin air in an instant. Megan stared at the phone, then turned her piercing gaze to Derek. Her beautiful face contorted into an expression of absolute disgust. A guarantor, she spat out the word like it was a vile poison. Your father was paying for this. You lied to me. You told me you were a self-made man. You told my father you had the capital to match our lifestyle, and you are nothing but a broke, pathetic fraud living off your daddy's charity. Derek stepped forward, holding up his raw, bleeding hands in a plea for understanding. Megan, please. I did not know. I swear to you I thought the money was from my stock dividends and my bonuses. I am working out there on the docks right now trying to prove myself to your father. I am doing this for us. Megan let out a harsh, mocking laugh that cut straight to his core. For us. You are doing manual labor because that is all you are equipped for. My father was right about you from day one. You do not belong in our world. You are a complete embarrassment. The cruelty in her words struck Derek harder than any physical blow he had taken that day. The woman he loved, the woman he had married and sworn to protect, was looking at him as if he were an infectious disease. There was no sympathy for his physical pain, no understanding of his deep humiliation. There was only raw, unfiltered entitlement. Listen to me very carefully, Derek, Megan said, stepping closer, her voice dropping to a venomous, threatening whisper. I did not marry a charity case. I will not be the wife of a dock worker who cannot even afford my monthly expenses. If my father finds out that we are broke, he will cut us off from the family trust permanently. I will not lose my inheritance because you are too incompetent to manage your own life. She grabbed her designer purse from the table and walked toward the grand staircase, pausing on the first step to look down at him. You have until tomorrow morning to fix this mess. Call your father, beg him, threaten him. Do whatever you have to do to get that money turned back on. I do not care how you get it. But if that mortgage payment bounces tomorrow and if my credit cards are not working by the time I wake up, I am calling my lawyer. I will file for divorce before noon. I will take this house, I will take the cars, and I will make sure you are left with absolutely nothing. Do not test me. She turned her back on him and marched up the stairs, the sharp click of her heels echoing like a countdown timer. A heavy bedroom door slammed shut upstairs, locking him out of their shared life. Derek stood alone in the grand foyer, completely paralyzed by the sudden violent collapse of his reality. His chest heaved as a cold panic set in. He had no cash reserves left. His personal savings were tied up in a joint account that was now entirely locked down. If Megan actually filed for divorce, her family's ruthless legal team would bury him in court. He needed a lifeline immediately. He needed a personal loan. Desperation drove him down the hall and into Megan's home office. He turned on the brass desk lamp and began rummaging frantically through her perfectly organized filing cabinets. He was looking for their joint tax returns, or the original mortgage deeds, anything he could use to secure an emergency personal loan from a bank first thing in the morning. He pulled out folders labeled with household expenses, contractor receipts, and luxury vacation itineraries, tossing them aside when they proved useless. He yanked the bottom drawer open so hard it nearly derailed off its metal tracks. As he reached into the very back of the deep drawer to grab a stack of financial portfolios, his fingers brushed against something hard taped beneath the bottom panel. He frowned, kneeling down on the hardwood floor to investigate. It was a thick, unmarked manila envelope intentionally hidden completely out of sight. His heart hammered against his ribs. Why would Megan hide a file underneath a drawer in her own office? He peeled the heavy tape away and pulled the envelope out. It was sealed tight. He ripped the top open, sliding the contents onto the smooth mahogany desk under the bright lamplight. The first page was a dense legal contract stamped by a private commercial lending firm, but it was not a document for their mortgage or their vehicles. It was a high-risk commercial collateral agreement. And right there, printed in bold black ink at the top of the page, was his own name, Derek Pierce. His breath caught in his throat. He flipped frantically to the signature page. His signature was there, perfectly executed in blue ink. The only problem was, he had never seen this document before in his entire life. The early morning sun barely cut through the thick fog rolling off the interstate as Derek pulled his car into the empty parking lot of a quiet roadside diner. It was miles away from his affluent neighborhood, a place where nobody from Thorn Logistics or his wife's elite country club would ever step foot. Martin was already sitting in a corner booth nursing a cup of black coffee. Derek slid into the cracked vinyl seat across from him. He looked completely shattered. The dark circles under his eyes spoke of a sleepless, agonizing night, and he kept his raw, blistered hands carefully resting on his lap. Without saying a single word, Derek reached into his jacket and pulled out the thick manila envelope he had found taped beneath Megan's desk. His bandaged hands trembled violently as he slid the heavy stack of papers across the Formica table. Martin did not flinch. He set his coffee mug down with practiced calm, picked up the file, and began to read. The silence between the father and son stretched heavy and suffocating, broken only by the faint hum of the diner's old refrigerator. Derek watched his father's face for any sign of shock, but Martin's expression remained entirely unreadable. He turned page after page, his eyes scanning the dense legal jargon, the notarized stamps, and the unmistakable, perfectly executed forgery of his son's signature in bright blue ink. "Dad," Derek finally whispered, his voice cracking under the weight of his absolute terror. "She forged my signature. Megan hid this under her drawer. I do not even know what this contract means, but it has my name on every single page. I am terrified." Martin closed the file and rested his hands flat on the table. He looked at his son with a piercing, sorrowful clarity. "This is a commercial lien," Derek Martin said, his voice steady, but laced with a cold, terrifying authority. "Your wife secretly used your personal information and your flawless credit score to take out a second mortgage on your estate. She extracted $200,000 in pure cash." Derek felt the air leave his lungs. 200,000. That is impossible. The bank would need my physical presence. They would need my verbal consent. "Not if she had a corrupt notary and a compliant loan officer," Martin replied sharply. "People like Gregory Thorne operate on leverage and bribes. Look at the beneficiary account on page 4. Derek leaned over his eyes, scanning the highlighted routing number. Thorne Logistics Corporate Operating Fund. The reality hit Derek with the force of a freight train. He was not just broke. He was buried under a mountain of debt he never authorized, and the money had been funneled directly into his father-in-law's business. Gregory's company is bleeding cash. Martin continued delivering the harsh truth without sugarcoating a single syllable. Thorne Logistics is on the verge of total bankruptcy. Gregory did not hire you because he respected your degree. He did not give his daughter to you because he welcomed you into the family. He brought you in because you were clean, legally unattached to his failing empire and naive enough to trust them. You were never the son-in-law, Derek. You are the scapegoat. When the company inevitably crashes, Gregory and Megan will walk away clean. They will leave you holding the bag for $250,000 in fraudulent commercial debt. You will lose your house, your career, and your freedom. The sheer malice of the plan made Derek physically sick. His own wife, the woman he had sworn to love and protect, had viewed him as nothing more than a disposable financial shield. She had been orchestrating his absolute ruin while sleeping in the same bed. Panic seized Derek's chest. "I have to go to the police," he said, grabbing the edge of the table. "I have to report her for identity theft before they steal anything else from me." Martin reached across the table and clamped his hand over Derek's wrist, stopping him instantly. "No," Martin commanded. "If you go to the police right now with no proof of the notary's corruption, Gregory's expensive lawyers will spin this. They will say you willingly signed the documents to save your family business and are now lying to avoid the debt. You will end up in a drawn-out legal battle you cannot afford. You must maintain absolute silence. You will go home, you will apologize to Megan for the credit cards, and you will act as if you know absolutely nothing about this file." Derek swallowed hard, terrified but trusting the absolute certainty in his father's eyes. "What are we going to do?" "Watch and learn," Martin said. He pulled his phone from his pocket and dialed his lawyer and financial manager, Jonathan Reed. Jonathan picked up immediately. "Martin," Jonathan said, "the accounts are completely frozen. The Thorne family is panicking." "Good," Martin replied, his tone turning to pure ice. "We are escalating. Megan Thorne forged my son's signature on a $200,000 commercial lien. I am sending you the scanned document now. I need you to quietly contact the Federal Banking Commission and prepare a fraud trap. Find out exactly which loan officer processed this application. We are going to lock them all in a cage they built themselves." As Martin hung up the phone, a sharp vibration echoed against the table. Derek looked down at his cell phone. The caller ID flashed Gregory Thorne. Derek stared at the screen, a cold sweat breaking out on the back of his neck. "Answer it," Martin instructed quietly. "Put it on speaker. Do exactly what I told you. Play the obedient, frightened son-in-law." Derek took a deep breath, swiped the screen, and tapped the speaker icon. "Good morning, Gregory," Derek said, trying to keep his voice from shaking. The voice that boomed out of the speaker was devoid of any familial warmth. It was the voice of a predator who had his prey cornered. "Listen to me very carefully, boy," Gregory sneered. "Megan told me about your little financial hiccup last night. It seems your useless father cut off your allowance. Now you are broke, and my daughter is suffering the consequences of your pathetic lies. I have a solution, but you will do exactly as I say." Derek glanced at Martin, who gave a single slow nod. "What do you want me to do?" Derek asked. "I want you at the downtown branch of Continental Bank at exactly noon today," Gregory ordered. "You are going to sign an extension on a commercial loan to inject liquidity back into my company and cover your wife's expenses. If you refuse, or if you try to run, I will personally hand over a very interesting file to the police. A file showing that you committed massive mortgage fraud using my company's routing numbers. You will sign the papers today, Derek, or I will see you rot in a federal penitentiary. Do not be late." The line went dead. Derek stared at the dead phone, the threat hanging heavily in the air. Martin leaned forward, his voice a calm anchor in the storm. "Go to the bank," Martin instructed. "Play the terrified, broken man Gregory expects to see. Ask endless questions. Demand to read every single line of the extension contract. Tell the loan officer you forgot your reading glasses or that you need to call your accountant to verify the tax implications. Buy us time." Derek nodded, swallowing his fear, and left the diner to face his executioners. Martin spent the rest of the day coordinating with Jonathan, laying the invisible tripwires of their trap. As dusk fell, Martin was sitting in his modest living room reviewing financial portfolios on his tablet. The quiet evening was shattered by the sound of tires crunching aggressively on his gravel driveway. He looked out the window. A sleek black luxury SUV was parked right on his front lawn. Gregory Thorne stepped out, buttoning his tailored suit jacket. Megan followed, clutching a designer handbag, looking around Martin's working-class neighborhood with an expression of profound disgust. They walked up to the front porch and knocked heavily. Martin opened the door. Gregory did not wait for an invitation. He pushed past Martin, stepping into the small hallway, his eyes scanning the simple furniture and the faded rug. "Martin," Gregory said, his tone dripping with fake pity and immense arrogance. "I am sorry to drop in unannounced, but we have a family crisis on our hands." Megan stepped inside behind her father, crossing her arms. She refused to even look at Martin directly. "We need to talk about your son," she said coldly. Martin gestured to the armchairs, his face completely unreadable. "Have a seat. Let us talk." Gregory did not sit. He preferred to stand towering over Martin in his own home to establish dominance. "I will get straight to the point." Gregory began, his voice echoing in the small room. "Derek has made a catastrophic mistake. He engaged in massive mortgage fraud using my company's financial credentials. He signed documents he had no business signing, and now the federal authorities are sniffing around." Martin sat down slowly in his worn recliner. "Derek has always been a law-abiding man," Martin replied evenly. Megan let out a sharp theatrical sob. She dabbed her dry eyes with a tissue. "He fooled all of us, Martin. I thought I married a provider, someone who could take care of me. Instead, I married a liar who dragged my family's pristine reputation into the mud. I have been crying all day. I am so humiliated." Gregory placed a heavy hand on his daughter's shoulder, playing the protective patriarch perfectly. "My daughter's heart is broken. I was ready to hand Derek over to the police this afternoon. I had the fraudulent loan files sitting on my desk ready for the authorities. But Megan begged me to show mercy." Gregory took a step closer to Martin, his eyes locking onto the older man. "Mercy is expensive, Martin. If I am going to use my legal team to sweep Derek's little felony under the rug and protect him from a 20-year prison sentence, someone has to cover the financial damages." Gregory pulled a folded document from his breast pocket and tossed it onto the coffee table. "I did a background check on you. I know you have a retirement fund. $100,000 sitting in a basic savings account. I want it. Martin looked at the paper, then back at Gregory. You want my life savings. I am offering you a bargain, Gregory sneered. Hand over the $100,000 by tomorrow morning to recapitalize my company, and I will make the fraud charges disappear. Derek stays out of prison, and Megan will gracefully agree to a quiet, uncontested divorce. If you refuse, I will personally see your son handcuffed and thrown into a federal penitentiary by Friday. The sheer audacity of the extortion would have made any other man scream. Any other father would have lunged at Gregory's throat or thrown them both out into the street. But Martin Pierce was not just any man. He knew that the loudest person in the room is always the weakest. Martin calmly leaned forward and picked up the ceramic teapot resting on the table. He poured himself a cup of herbal tea, the hot liquid steaming gently in the cool, air-conditioned room. He took a slow sip, savoring the flavor, completely ignoring the mounting tension. Megan shifted, uncomfortably annoyed by his silence. Did you not hear my father? We need an answer right now. Martin set the teacup down with a soft clink. He looked up, a serene, almost pleasant smile forming on his face. $100,000, Martin repeated softly. To save my only son from ruin. That seems like a very fair price to pay. Gregory's chest puffed out, a look of immense satisfaction washing over his face. He had won. He had successfully broken the old man. I am glad you are being reasonable, Gregory said, straightening his tie. I will have my assistant send you the routing details in the morning. Wire the funds by 9 o'clock sharp. Martin nodded slowly. You will have exactly what you deserve by tomorrow morning, Gregory. You have my word. Gregory smirked, turning toward the door. Come along, Megan. We are done here. Megan gave Martin one final look of pure disgust before following her father out the door, victorious. Martin stood quietly in his living room, watching through the front window as the luxury SUV reversed out of his driveway and sped off into the night. They were celebrating their easy victory, convinced they had just bullied a helpless old man into surrendering his life savings. Once the red taillights disappeared around the corner, Martin walked over to his heavy wooden bookshelf. He reached behind a row of thick encyclopedias and pulled out a sleek black leather briefcase. He carried it to the dining table, undid the brass clasps, and opened it. Inside was not a modest retirement fund. Inside were the blueprints of an empire. He pulled out a thick stack of official legal documents stamped with the seal of the State Commercial Registry. The top document was a master lease agreement for the massive industrial complex located on the south side of the city. It was the exact same complex that housed Thorne Logistics. Gregory Thorne was drowning in debt, desperately trying to keep his failing business afloat by extorting his son-in-law. What Gregory did not know was that he did not own the land his warehouses were built on. He rented it from an anonymous corporate holding company. Martin ran his finger over the signature line at the bottom of the master deed. The registered owner of the holding company, the man who held the absolute power to evict Thorne Logistics and seize every single asset on the property, was Martin Pierce. Martin picked up his cell phone and dialed his lawyer again. Jonathan Martin, said, his voice echoing in the empty house. The trap is set. Send the eviction and asset seizure notice to Thorne Logistics at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. Monday morning arrived with the oppressive heat of July already baking the asphalt outside Thorne Logistics. Inside the executive corner office, the air conditioning hummed a quiet, expensive tune. Gregory Thorne sat behind his massive mahogany desk, sipping a fresh espresso. He wore a tailored navy suit, looking every inch the victorious tycoon he believed himself to be. Standing on the opposite side of the desk was Derek. His son-in-law looked exhausted, wearing the same sweat-stained work clothes from the previous week, his hands heavily wrapped in white gauze to cover the burst blisters. Gregory leaned back in his leather chair, a cruel, satisfied grin spreading across his face. "You look terrible," Gregory sneered, swirling the espresso in his cup. "But I suppose that is what hard work does to a man who has never had to actually earn his keep. You should be thanking me, and you should be thanking your father. It seems the old man actually had some use after all. Assuming his wire transfer clears this morning, I might just let you keep your job pushing boxes. Maybe in a decade I will let you drive a forklift." Derek kept his eyes fixed on the floor, biting the inside of his cheek to stop himself from reacting. He remembered Martin's strict instructions to play the broken, defeated victim. "I appreciate the opportunity," Derek replied, forcing his voice to sound hollow and subdued. Gregory laughed loudly, a booming sound that echoed off the glass walls of the office. "Opportunity. This is not an opportunity, boy. This is a leash. Now get out of my office and get back to the loading dock." We have 3 shipments arriving from overseas, and you are going to unload every single crate by yourself. Before Derek could turn toward the door, a sharp, authoritative knock shattered the smug atmosphere. The heavy glass door swung open without waiting for an invitation. A tall, broad-shouldered man in a crisp gray suit stepped into the room. He wore a gold badge clipped to his belt and carried a thick leather folder. He did not look like a warehouse supervisor. He looked like the law. Gregory scowled, slamming his espresso cup onto his desk. "Who the hell are you?" "This is a restricted executive area." The man ignored the hostility. He walked straight up to the mahogany desk, his face a mask of absolute professional indifference. "Gregory Thorne," he asked, his voice flat and commanding. "Yes, I am the CEO of this company. Now answer my question or I will have security throw you out." The man reached into his folder, pulled out a thick stack of legal documents bound by a heavy blue seal, and dropped it directly onto Gregory's pristine desk. "You have been served," the man said. Gregory stared at the papers, his arrogant smirk faltering for a split second. "Served? Served for what?" The bailiff did not blink. "That is a notice of default and immediate eviction from Apex Property Management. You are 4 months in arrears on your commercial lease agreement for this industrial complex. The total outstanding balance, including late fees and legal penalties, is exactly $1.2 million. You have 48 hours to vacate the premises or face immediate asset seizure. Have a good day, Mr. Thorne." The bailiff turned on his heel and marched out of the office, leaving a suffocating silence in his wake. Derek watched as the color completely drained from Gregory's face. The wealthy, untouchable tycoon suddenly looked like a terrified child. Gregory's trembling hands reached for the documents. He flipped past the cover page, his eyes darting frantically across the dense legal text, desperately searching for a mistake. But there was no mistake. What Gregory did not know, and what Derek was only just beginning to understand, was the blood and sweat poured into the very foundation of this building. 20 years ago, Martin Pierce had worked 3 grueling jobs. He had saved every single penny, denying himself new clothes, vacations, and basic comforts. While men like Gregory inherited their wealth, Martin had bought a barren, overlooked plot of industrial dirt on the outskirts of the city. He held on to it, bleeding for it, until the city expanded and that dirt became a gold mine. Martin was not just a quiet old man living in a modest suburb. He was the invisible landlord who owned the ground beneath Gregory's feet. "Get out!" Gregory suddenly roared, his voice cracking with pure panic. He glared at Derek with wild, bloodshot eyes. "Get out of my office right now and get back to work. Say a single word about this to anyone, and I will destroy you." Derek nodded meekly and backed out of the room, closing the heavy glass door behind him. Through the glass, he watched his father-in-law completely unravel. Gregory tore through his desk drawers, knocking over his expensive espresso cup. The dark liquid spilled across the mahogany wood, dripping onto the pristine carpet. But Gregory did not even notice. He grabbed his desk phone with shaking hands and frantically dialed the number printed at the top of the eviction notice. Apex Property Management. A cold, automated-sounding female voice answered. "This is Gregory Thorne," he shouted into the receiver, pacing frantically behind his desk. "I am the CEO of Thorne Logistics. I just received a ridiculous eviction notice. There has been a massive misunderstanding, a banking error. My accounts are being restructured this week. I need to speak to the principal owner immediately." The voice on the other end remained entirely unbothered by his shouting. "The principal owner does not take direct calls from delinquent tenants, Mr. Thorne. All communication must go through our legal department. You do not understand." Gregory pleaded, his arrogant facade entirely stripped away, replaced by the desperate begging of a cornered rat. "I just need an extension. 1 week. That is all I am asking for. We are hosting a massive charity fundraising gala tomorrow night at the Grand Plaza. Dozens of angel investors will be there. I am securing a massive capital injection. I will have the $1.2 million by Friday. Just let me meet the owner. Let me look him in the eye and explain my business model, please." Gregory stopped pacing, gripping the edge of his desk as he waited for a response. The silence on the phone felt like a physical weight pressing down on his chest. His entire empire, his luxury cars, his daughter's lavish lifestyle, all of it was built on a mountain of debt that was currently collapsing right on top of his head. If he lost this warehouse, the banks would instantly call in his other loans. He would be completely ruined. The representative from Apex Property Management finally spoke. Her voice was colder than ice, cutting through Gregory's frantic lies with surgical precision. "There will be no extension, Mr. Thorne. The principal owner is fully aware of your true financial situation. He knows about your failing business model. He knows about the fraudulent loans you have attempted to secure. Gregory froze his breath, catching in his throat. How could the owner possibly know that? In fact, the woman continued, her tone dropping into a chilling promise. The principal owner has already secured an exclusive invitation to your fundraising gala tomorrow evening. He will be attending personally. Gregory swallowed hard, a cold sweat breaking out across his forehead. He is coming to the gala. Yes, she replied smoothly. He wants to see your performance firsthand. And he has instructed me to pass along a very specific message. If the outstanding balance of $1.2 million is not settled in full by the time the evening concludes, he will not wait for the 48-hour deadline. He will execute the asset seizure right there in the middle of the ballroom in front of every single one of your prospective investors. Have a wonderful evening, Mr. Thorne. The line went dead. The rhythmic clicking of the disconnected call echoed in the silent office. Gregory stood paralyzed, the phone slowly slipping from his trembling fingers and crashing onto the floor. He stared blankly at the wall, completely oblivious to the fact that his own son-in-law was watching him from the warehouse floor, knowing exactly who was coming to dinner. Gregory burst out of the glass doors of his executive office like a man possessed by a demon. His immaculate navy suit jacket was discarded somewhere behind him. His expensive silk tie was violently loosened, and a heavy layer of panicked sweat coated his forehead. He marched onto the vast concrete floor of the warehouse, his eyes wild and bloodshot. He began shouting orders at the top of his lungs, dismissing the regular warehouse staff hours early, lying to them that a major structural systems failure required the floor to be cleared immediately. Within 15 minutes, the massive industrial building was entirely empty, leaving only Gregory and Derek surrounded by towering shelves of inventory. Gregory grabbed a metal clipboard and shoved it hard into Derek's chest. Listen to me very closely, Gregory barked, his voice cracking with pure desperation. You're going to load every single pallet from aisle 4 and aisle 7 onto the unmarked freight trucks parked at the rear loading dock. Those are high-value electronics and imported machinery. We are moving them to an off-the-books storage facility tonight. I want double the usual load moved before midnight. Get to work. Derek looked at the heavy clipboard, then up at the towering stacks of inventory. His business degree immediately connected the dots. Gregory was attempting to illegally liquidate and hide commercial assets before the principal owner could execute the seizure tomorrow evening. He was attempting to commit a massive federal crime, and he was trying to use Derek as his blind, disposable mule. If the authorities caught them, Gregory would undoubtedly claim that his son-in-law went rogue and stole the merchandise. Derek dropped the clipboard onto the concrete floor. The loud metallic clatter echoed sharply through the empty warehouse. I am not doing that, Derek said firmly, standing his ground. That is a federal crime. You are actively trying to hide assets from a legal eviction. I will not be your accessory to fraud. Gregory's face turned a violent, explosive shade of purple. He lunged forward, grabbing Derek by the collar of his sweat-soaked shirt, raising his fist ready to strike him. But before Gregory could throw a punch, the heavy metal door of the warehouse screeched open. Megan marched in her designer heels, clicking sharply against the concrete. She had rushed over after receiving a frantic text from her father about the impending financial ruin. She took one look at the standoff, assessing the situation with ruthless clarity. What is the problem here? Megan demanded, her voice echoing coldly in the cavernous space. He is refusing to load the trucks, Gregory spat out, releasing Derek's collar with a shove. He is talking about federal crimes like a pathetic coward when our entire legacy is on the line. Megan slowly walked up to Derek. The polished, sophisticated facade she presented at country club dinners was completely gone. She looked at his blistered, bleeding hands, his exhausted posture, and his defiant eyes. Without a single word of warning, she raised her hand and slapped Derek across the face with everything she had. The sharp, stinging crack rang out like a gunshot. Derek stumbled back, his hand flying to his burning cheek. He stared at his wife in absolute shock. You pathetic, ungrateful savage, Megan hissed, her face contorting with sheer disgust and entitlement. We lifted you out of the gutter. We gave you a life you could never have achieved on your own, and this is how you repay us. You are nothing but a useless charity case. We need cash right now to save my father's company, and you are going to get it. You are going to get into your car, drive to your father's miserable little house, and you are going to steal his savings passbook and his banking details tonight. He owes us that money for cutting off my credit cards and humiliating me. You will transfer every single penny he has into my account. or I will make sure you rot in a cell for the rest of your miserable life." Derek stood frozen, the stinging heat on his cheek completely eclipsed by the icy realization of who he had actually married. The woman standing in front of him was not a wife. She was a monster. She was demanding that he break into his own father's home and rob the man who had secretly paid for her luxury lifestyle for 2 years. A new, unfamiliar strength began to rise in Derek's chest. He lowered his hand from his cheek, standing up to his full height. He looked Megan directly in the eyes, no longer afraid of her screaming or her father's empty threats. "I will never steal from my father," Derek said, his voice dropping to a dangerously calm register. "I will not sign your fraudulent loans, and I will not load your illegal trucks. I am done with you and this family." Megan did not scream. She did not throw another tantrum. Instead, a slow, chilling smirk spread across her perfectly manicured lips. It was a look of pure, calculated sociopathy. She slowly unclasped her designer handbag and reached inside. "Oh, Derek," she whispered, her tone suddenly turning mockingly sweet. "I think you are going to do exactly what I tell you to do." She pulled out a folded piece of glossy paper and pressed it flat against his chest. Derek looked down instinctively, taking the paper from her hands. He unfolded it, his eyes scanning the black and white image printed on the page. It was an ultrasound, a sonogram. His heart stopped beating. The warehouse around him completely vanished. He stared at the tiny shape on the glossy paper, his hands trembling violently. A baby. His baby. He looked up at Megan, his mind unable to process the collision of profound joy and absolute horror. "You are pregnant," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Megan took a step closer, her blue eyes devoid of any maternal warmth. "Yes," she replied, her voice as cold as a steel blade. "I am 8 weeks pregnant, but do not get sentimental, Derek, because this is not a celebration. This is a transaction." She pointed a manicured finger at the ultrasound in his shaking hands. "You have a choice to make tonight. You will go to your father's house, you will steal that money, and you will bring it to me before midnight. If you refuse, I will call my private clinic first thing tomorrow morning and schedule an appointment to terminate this pregnancy." Derek gasped, stepping back as if she had just stabbed him in the stomach. "You cannot do that." Megan laughed, a hollow, terrifying sound that chilled him to the bone. "Try me. I will erase this mistake from my life tomorrow. Or better yet, maybe I will keep it. Maybe I will pack my bags, fly to Europe with my father's remaining cash, and give birth overseas. I will leave your name off the birth certificate. I will raise this child halfway across the world, and you will never ever see its face. You will be legally and entirely erased from your own child's life." She leaned in, her voice a toxic whisper directly in his ear. "Steal the money, Derek. Betray your father tonight or lose your child forever. The choice is yours." The digital clock on Martin's desk flashed 2 in the morning. The race against time had officially begun. Derek sat silently in the corner of the study, his hands bandaged, his mind finally clear after Martin and Jonathan had exposed Megan's fabricated ultrasound just an hour prior. The sheer malice of her fake pregnancy had severed any remaining emotional ties Derek held for that family. Now the room was a war room. Jonathan Reed, Martin's razor-sharp attorney, was rapidly typing on his laptop, his face illuminated by the harsh glow of the screen. "Gregory's flight to Buenos Aires leaves at 11 tomorrow night," Jonathan stated, his fingers flying across the keys. He booked a one-way first-class ticket. If he boards that plane, he takes the liquidity he illegally extracted from his failing assets, and he leaves Derek holding the bag for $250,000 in commercial fraud. Martin stood by the window, staring out into the dark suburban street. "We cannot let that happen," Martin replied, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "We need a federal asset freeze, and we need it before the banks open at 9 this morning." Jonathan pushed his glasses up his nose. "A federal injunction requires an airtight showing of imminent flight and wire fraud. We have the eviction notice, we have his failing company records, but Gregory is using an offshore holding account routed through a local corporate bank to launder the cash. The transactions are being approved manually. Someone on the inside of Continental Bank is bypassing the security protocols for him." Martin turned around, a predatory glint in his eyes. "Who is the branch director handling Thorn Logistics?" "Richard Sterling," Jonathan answered, pulling up a digital profile. "He has been Gregory's personal banker for 10 years. Martin adjusted his watch. "Then Mr. Sterling is about to have a very bad morning." At exactly 7 in the morning, a sleek black sedan pulled up outside the towering glass facade of Continental Bank. Richard Sterling, a man in his mid-50s wearing an expensive tailored suit bought with years of quiet bribes, walked toward the private executive entrance with a coffee in hand. Before he could scan his badge, Martin Pierce and Jonathan Reed stepped directly into his path. Richard frowned, his hand hovering over the scanner. "Excuse me, the bank does not open to the public for another 2 hours. You need to step back." Martin did not move an inch. He looked down at Richard with a gaze that carried the weight of absolute authority. "We are not the public, Mr. Sterling. We are your worst nightmare if you do not invite us inside immediately." Richard attempted a scoff, but Jonathan smoothly handed him a single sheet of paper. It was a forensic accounting ledger tracing 5 distinct wire transfers of $50,000 each from Gregory Thorne's shadow accounts directly into Richard's offshore shell company in the Cayman Islands. The color completely drained from Richard's face. The coffee cup trembled in his hand. "My office." Richard stammered frantically, swiping his badge and ushering them through the heavy glass doors to avoid any witnesses. Once the heavy mahogany door of the director's office clicked shut, Martin took a seat across from Richard's desk. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "Gregory Thorne is boarding a flight to South America tomorrow night," Martin stated coldly. "He is currently attempting to wire the remaining capital from Thorne Logistics into an untraceable offshore account. You are the one manually overriding the federal anti-money laundering flags to make that happen. If that money leaves this country, Jonathan here will hand this ledger to the FBI. You will lose your pension, your career, and you will spend the next 15 years in federal prison for conspiracy to commit wire fraud." Richard swallowed hard, sweat beading on his forehead. "If I stop the transfers, Gregory will ruin me. He has leverage." Martin leaned forward, planting his hands firmly on the desk. "Gregory Thorne is a dead man walking. He rents the land his company sits on from me. I am the principal owner of Apex Property Management, and I am seizing his entire estate tomorrow evening. You are backing a corpse, Richard. I am giving you exactly one chance to survive. You will freeze his outbound transfers indefinitely. You will flag his accounts for suspicious activity, trapping his capital domestically. Do this, and your little Cayman Islands problem disappears. Betray me, and I will personally see you buried next to him." Richard slumped into his leather chair. The fight completely drained out of him. With shaking hands, he logged into the bank's mainframe. He pulled up Gregory Thorne's pending wire transfers, a massive sum of nearly $1 million, queued for international departure at noon. Martin watched as Richard typed in the override commands, initiating a hard lock on the routing numbers. The screen flashed bright red. "It is done," Richard whispered, staring at the monitor. "His outbound avenues are completely locked. The system has initiated a domestic freeze pending a fraud review. Gregory cannot move a single cent out of the country." Martin nodded, standing up and buttoning his jacket. "You made the right choice, Richard. See that the freeze remains absolute." As Martin and Jonathan walked out into the bright morning sun, Jonathan let out a slow breath. "We cut off his escape route. Gregory is trapped, but we still have a massive legal vulnerability." Martin unlocked the car. "Explain." "The $200,000 commercial lien Megan took out in Derek's name," Jonathan said, pulling up his tablet. "Freezing Gregory's assets stops him from running, but it does not invalidate that fraudulent debt hanging over your son's head. The bank will still come after Derek for the money unless we can definitively prove identity theft and forgery. We need the original physical contract and the internal metadata showing Megan and Gregory initiated the loan from their IP addresses. Without the original evidence, it becomes a drawn-out legal battle of he said, she said." Martin gripped the steering wheel, his jaw clenching. "Where is the original file?" "Gregory's private server in his physical safe," Jonathan replied. "Right in the heart of Thorne Logistics." Back at Martin's house, they laid the reality on the table. Derek listened intently as Jonathan explained the severe legal hurdle they were facing. The only way to completely exonerate Derek and ensure Megan faced federal forgery charges was to retrieve the master server drive and the physical documents locked inside Gregory's executive suite. It was a fortress. Gregory had restricted access, and getting the police involved without hard proof would tip him off, giving him enough time to shred the papers and wipe the servers clean before a warrant could be issued. A heavy silence fell over the living room. Martin looked at Jonathan, calculating the risks of hiring a private contractor to break in. It was highly illegal and could jeopardize their entire case. "I will do it," Derek said, his voice breaking the silence. Martin turned to look at his son. Derek was standing by the window, his posture completely transformed. The broken, exhausted man from the night before was gone. In his place stood a man fueled by righteous fury and a desperate need for justice. "Derek, it is too dangerous," Martin warned, stepping forward. "If Gregory catches you in that server room, he will not hesitate to use violence. He is a desperate man. He already expects me to come to work today," Derek replied, his eyes burning with absolute resolve. "He thinks he broke me last night. He thinks Megan's threat about the baby forced me into submission. They expect me to walk in there with my head down, ready to be their obedient slave. I have the security clearance to access the executive floor, and I know exactly where he keeps his physical safe." Derek walked over to the table and picked up his car keys. "I let them use me. I let them manipulate me. But today I am going to walk right into the belly of the beast, and I am going to rip their empire apart from the inside. I am going back to Thorn Logistics." The morning sun glared relentlessly against the tinted glass of Thorn Logistics as Derek walked through the main sliding doors. He kept his shoulders slumped, his eyes cast downward, perfectly embodying the shattered, desperate man they expected him to be. He took the elevator up to the executive suite, the silence of the ride giving him a final moment to bury his burning rage beneath a mask of absolute submission. When he pushed open the glass doors of the boardroom, Gregory and Megan were already there. Gregory was pacing behind his desk, barking instructions into his phone about overseas flight logistics, while Megan sat casually on a leather sofa, sipping an iced latte. She looked up, her blue eyes gleaming with toxic triumph as she took in Derek's defeated posture. "I spoke to my father," Derek said, his voice quiet, carefully engineered to sound completely broken. "He is furious, but he agreed. He is liquidating the retirement fund this afternoon. You will have the money before the banks close today." Megan set her cup down, a slow, venomous smile spreading across her perfectly painted lips. "I knew you would come to your senses, Derek," she purred, dripping with condescension. "It is amazing how quickly a man learns his place when the stakes are high enough. You made the right choice for our child." Gregory hung up his phone and let out a sharp, mocking bark of laughter. "You finally proved you have a shred of survival instinct, boy. Just make sure the wire clears. Now get out of my sight and make yourself useful on the warehouse floor until the transfer is confirmed." Derek nodded meekly, turning his back on them. He walked out of the suite feeling the intense burn of their arrogant gazes, but deep inside a cold, calculated focus sharpened his mind. They had swallowed the bait entirely. By 1 o'clock, the piercing wail of the lunch siren echoed across the industrial complex. The warehouse floor quickly emptied as the loading crews and floor supervisors migrated to the break room or the food trucks parked outside. The executive suite was dead quiet. Gregory had locked himself in his office to finalize his escape plans, and Megan had left for a supposedly stressful spa appointment. Derek seized the narrow window of opportunity. Using his newly issued operations manager keycard, he bypassed the secondary security doors and slipped into the main server room located at the back of the administrative wing. The room was freezing, filled with the deafening hum of massive cooling fans and rows of blinking data racks. Derek pulled a high-capacity encrypted flash drive from his pocket, courtesy of Jonathan Reed. He plugged it directly into the master terminal and initiated a total system bypass. The screen flared to life, requesting administrative credentials. Derek held his breath, typing in the master override password he had spotted on a sticky note under the IT director's desk just days prior. It worked. The system granted full access. Derek immediately located the hidden financial directories, dragging the folders containing Gregory's offshore routing histories, the forged commercial lien, and the falsified loan applications onto the encrypted drive. The progress bar appeared on the screen, a thin green line that moved with agonizing slowness. 10%, 20%. Derek wiped a bead of sweat from his freezing forehead, his heart hammering violently against his ribs. Every second felt like an hour. While the data copied, Derek turned his attention to the heavy steel filing cabinet tucked in the corner. He grabbed a small pry tool from a nearby utility drawer and forced the cheap lock. Inside, buried beneath stacks of old shipping manifests, he found it. The original physical copy of the $200,000 commercial lien bearing his expertly forged signature in bright blue ink. He quickly folded the thick document, his hands shaking slightly as he secured the undeniable proof of his innocence. He glanced back at the monitor. 85%, 90%, The green bar crept forward, a painfully slow countdown to his salvation. 98%. 99%. A soft chime echoed from the terminal as the prompt declared the transfer complete. Derek rapidly ejected the encrypted flash drive and closed the terminal windows, wiping the recent activity logs just as Jonathan had instructed. He turned to leave, but his blood instantly ran cold. Heavy, hurried footsteps echoed sharply against the polished tile of the hallway outside. They were moving fast, accompanied by the distinct, frantic voice of Gregory Thorne. "I do not care about the lunch hour," Gregory barked to someone over his cell phone, his voice growing dangerously loud. "Wipe the localized backups immediately. I am heading to the main server room right now to physically pull the master drives. If anyone asks questions, tell them it is a standard hardware upgrade. Do not let anyone on this floor." Derek froze. Panic seized his chest with a suffocating grip. Gregory was not just finalizing his flight plans, he was actively destroying the evidence before his escape. The footsteps stopped right outside the server room door. Derek looked around frantically. The room was a concrete box with no windows, no secondary exits, and no place to hide. The electronic lock beeped sharply, signaling a valid keycard swipe. The heavy metal door mechanism clicked, unlocking. Gregory was walking in. Derek had less than a second to react. He frantically shoved the encrypted flash drive and the folded physical documents deep inside his shirt, pressing them flat against his chest and securing them tightly beneath the waistband of his trousers. He grabbed a thick bundle of blue Ethernet cables from a nearby utility cart, dropping to his knees behind the main server rack just as the heavy door swung open. Gregory stormed into the freezing room, his face flushed with panicked exertion. He stopped dead in his tracks, his eyes locking onto Derek. "What the hell are you doing in here?" Gregory roared, the sheer paranoia in his voice bouncing off the concrete walls. "This is a restricted area." Derek forced himself to look up, maintaining a perfectly steady expression of confused submission. "The regional logistics software crashed on my terminal." Derek lied smoothly, holding up the tangled bundle of cables. "The IT director is at lunch. I was just trying to trace the router connection to see if we had a physical hardware failure on the floor network." Gregory's eyes narrowed into dark, suspicious slits. The frantic desperation of a man backed into a corner radiated from him. He did not believe a single word. His gaze darted to the master terminal, then back to Derek's slightly bulkier midsection. "You do not touch my servers," Gregory hissed, stepping closer. His fists clenched tight. "You are a liar, just like your father." Gregory turned his head toward the open doorway and snapped his fingers sharply. Two massive private security contractors men Gregory had explicitly hired for his off-the-books operations stepped into the room. "Pin him to the wall and search him," Gregory ordered, his voice dripping with venomous malice. "Check every inch of him. If he took anything from this room, I want it back, and then I want him broken." The two massive security contractors lunged forward, their heavy hands reaching out to pin Derek against the freezing concrete wall. Derek had a fraction of a second to react before the encrypted flash drive and the physical forgery hidden against his ribs were discovered. He scrambled backward, his shoulder slamming hard against the wall right beside the emergency fire exit. His eyes locked onto the bright red casing of the industrial fire alarm pull station. Without a single moment of hesitation, Derek swung his elbow backwards, smashing the protective glass, and yanked the heavy white lever straight down. Instantly, a deafening, ear-piercing siren erupted through the entire facility. Blinding white strobe lights flashed violently across the server room, completely disorienting the security guards. The automated fire suppression system engaged, dropping the heavy magnetic locks on all the restricted doors and forcing them wide open for emergency evacuation. The sudden chaos provided the exact window Derek needed. He ducked under the outstretched arm of the nearest guard, driving his shoulder into the man's chest to knock him off balance, and sprinted out of the server room. He bolted down the executive hallway, blending seamlessly into the panicked crowd of administrative staff rushing toward the emergency stairwells. Gregory screamed orders behind him, but his voice was completely drowned out by the relentless blare of the alarm. Derek burst out of the emergency exit into the blazing July heat and sprinted straight to his car. He slammed the door shut, locked it, and tore out of the parking lot, his heart hammering furiously against his ribs. 20 minutes later, he pulled into Martin's driveway. He burst through the front door, gasping for air, and slammed the encrypted flash drive and the folded commercial lien onto the kitchen table. Late that afternoon, as the chaotic aftermath of the false fire alarm settled, Martin received a direct phone call from Gregory Thorne. The tone of the logistics CEO was brittle-laced with an arrogant exhaustion. He demanded Martin come to his executive office immediately. Martin arrived an hour later, his expression a mask of absolute stoicism. Gregory was sitting behind his mahogany desk, furiously rubbing his temples. He was entirely unaware of the federal asset freeze quietly tightening like a noose around his offshore accounts, blaming his banking delays on a temporary network glitch. He looked up as Martin entered, his eyes filled with pure disdain. "I do not have time for pleasantries, Martin," Gregory snapped, waving a hand dismissively. "Your son is a total catastrophe." Not only did he prove completely incapable of handling basic warehouse labor, but his sheer incompetence triggered a facility-wide fire alarm that cost me 2 hours of operational productivity. I fired him on the spot. He is banned from this property. Martin stood silently in the center of the office, his hands clasped casually behind his back. Gregory pulled a leather-bound checkbook from his desk drawer, grabbed an expensive fountain pen, and quickly scribbled a figure across the paper. He tore the check loose and tossed it carelessly across the desk. It fluttered to a stop near the edge. "There is a check for $500, Gregory said, leaning back in his plush chair. "Consider it compensation for your son's stupidity and severance for his miserable attempt at working for a real man. Use it to pay a fraction of his mortgage or buy yourself a nicer truck. I do not care. But I am laying down a strict boundary right now. Tonight is my annual charity fundraising gala at the Grand Plaza. It is a highly exclusive event for the city's absolute elite. I am securing massive capital investments to expand my empire. You and your son are strictly forbidden from coming anywhere near that hotel. If I see your face, or if Derek tries to crawl back to my daughter to beg for forgiveness in public, I will have my private security arrest you both for trespassing. Do I make myself perfectly clear?" Martin did not flinch at the barrage of insults. He did not raise his voice or demand respect. He stepped forward with slow, measured steps and picked up the $500 check from the polished wood of the desk. He examined the arrogant scrawl of Gregory's signature, a signature built on a mountain of fraudulent debt and lies. Any ordinary man would have torn the paper into shreds and thrown it back in Gregory's face. Martin simply folded the check neatly in half and slid it into the breast pocket of his jacket. He looked down at Gregory. The look in Martin's eyes was not one of a defeated, impoverished father. It was the icy, calculated gaze of an apex predator staring down a wounded animal that had just willingly stepped its foot directly into a steel trap. Gregory shifted uncomfortably in his expensive chair, a sudden, inexplicable chill running down his spine as he met Martin's unwavering stare. The silence stretched heavy and suffocating before Martin finally spoke. His voice was smooth, quiet, and carried a weight that Gregory completely failed to understand. "You have made yourself perfectly clear," Gregory Martin said softly. "You do not need to worry about me causing a scene at the door. I know exactly where my place is. Enjoy your evening. It will be one you will remember for the rest of your life." Martin turned his back on the CEO and walked out of the office, his footsteps steady and unhurried. The sun was beginning to set, casting long, dramatic shadows across the asphalt as Martin walked back to his old, reliable pickup truck. He unlocked the door and climbed inside, the oppressive heat of the day finally giving way to the cool evening breeze. He did not start the engine immediately. Instead, he reached around to the spacious rear bench of the cab. Resting carefully across the back seats was a premium heavy-duty garment bag protecting something entirely out of place in a dusty work truck. Martin pulled the zipper down just a few inches, revealing the immaculate fabric hidden inside. It was a custom-tailored midnight blue tuxedo crafted from the finest Italian wool, featuring sharp black silk lapels and a crisp pleated white shirt. Resting in a small velvet box tucked into the garment bag's pocket was a pair of brilliant diamond cufflinks. The entire ensemble had cost over $5,000, purchased years ago for an exclusive corporate summit he had attended as the anonymous titan of his real estate holding company. He zipped the bag back up, a cold, dangerous smile finally breaking across his face. Gregory Thorne thought he could banish Martin to the shadows with a $500 bribe. He thought his exclusive gala was an impenetrable fortress of wealth. Martin turned the key in the ignition, the truck's engine roaring to life. The trap was perfectly set. The evidence was secured. The hour of absolute punishment had finally arrived. The Grand Plaza ballroom was a blinding display of excessive wealth and suffocating arrogance. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over the city's absolute elite, reflecting off towering champagne pyramids and elaborate floral arrangements. A live string quartet played a sophisticated symphony in the corner, though the music was nearly drowned out by the clinking of crystal flutes and the loud, boastful laughter of men trading millions. At the center of the extravagant spectacle stood Gregory Thorne, holding court with a circle of prominent venture capitalists. He wore a plush velvet dinner jacket, flashing a brilliant, completely fabricated smile as he spun desperate lies about his logistics company's unprecedented growth. A few feet away, Megan glided across the polished marble floor in a sweeping emerald silk gown. She was dripping in heavy diamond jewelry pieces she had undoubtedly purchased with the stolen equity from her husband's forged commercial loan. She was playing the role of the perfect corporate heiress to absolute perfection, basking in the admiration of her wealthy peers. But the true cruelty of the evening was hidden in plain sight. Moving silently along the edges of the grand ballroom carrying a heavy silver tray loaded with discarded cocktail napkins and empty glasses was Derek. Gregory had delivered a final, devastating ultimatum that afternoon. As the ultimate punishment for the fire alarm incident and his refusal to obey orders, Derek was forced to attend the gala, not as a family member, but as contracted catering staff. It was a calculated public execution of Derek's pride designed to break his spirit completely before Gregory's midnight flight to South America. Every time Derek passed his wife's social circle, Megan would pointedly look through him, treating him as if he were an invisible, worthless servant. He kept his head down, his raw and blistered hands gripping the edges of the metal tray, enduring the unbearable humiliation just to buy his father the time needed to spring the trap. The heavy gold-leafed double doors at the main entrance of the grand ballroom suddenly swung open with a resounding heavy thud. The sheer force of the movement caught the immediate attention of the private security detail stationed by the coat check, but they instantly froze in their tracks. Standing in the threshold was Martin Pierce. The transformation was absolute and terrifying. He was no longer the quiet, unassuming older man in faded jeans and worn work boots. He was wearing the custom-tailored midnight blue Italian wool tuxedo. The sharp black silk lapels caught the brilliant light of the chandeliers, and the flawless diamond cufflinks sparkled at his wrists. He did not just walk into the room. He commanded it. He moved with the slow, devastating grace of an apex predator stepping directly into a cage of unsuspecting prey. The sheer weight of his commanding presence sent a visible electric ripple through the massive crowd. The string quartet faltered, a cellist missing a note as heads began to turn in rapid succession. Conversations died mid-sentence. The arrogant laughter faded into a tense, suffocating silence. Men who managed massive hedge funds and controlled political action committees instinctively stepped aside, carving a clear, unobstructed path for him across the marble floor. They did not know his face, but they instantly recognized the unmistakable aura of true, unyielding power. Martin walked straight past the extravagant ice sculptures and the towering displays of imported food. His gaze was locked with laser precision onto the exact center of the room. Derek paused near a high cocktail table, the heavy silver tray slipping slightly in his hands as he stared at his father in complete, breathless awe. Martin gave his son a barely perceptible nod, a silent, ironclad promise that the suffering was officially over. Then Martin continued his relentless march toward the circle of powerful investors. Gregory was mid-laugh, holding a glass of expensive aged scotch, when he finally noticed the sudden eerie quiet that had descended upon his hundreds of guests. He turned his head, a charming smile still plastered on his sweating face, only to have it wiped away instantly. The color drained entirely from Gregory's face, leaving him pale and shaken, only to be violently replaced by a dark, furious shade of crimson. The shock of seeing the man he had offered a pathetic $500 bribe to just hours ago, now dressed in a tuxedo worth more than his own custom velvet jacket, caused his brain to completely short-circuit. Gregory slammed his scotch glass onto a passing waiter's tray, the amber liquid spilling over the edges and staining the white linen. He marched forward, his polished corporate mask fracturing into pieces, intercepting Martin before he could reach the inner circle of investors. "What the hell do you think you are doing here?" Gregory hissed, his voice trembling with a toxic mixture of raw panic and explosive anger. "I explicitly forbade you from stepping foot on this property. You have completely lost your mind, old man." Martin simply stopped, his hands resting casually at his sides, completely unfazed by the hostile, aggressive approach. Gregory turned wildly toward the perimeter of the room, snapping his fingers frantically at the private security detail. "Guards, get over here immediately. We have a trespasser. This man is a beggar, a desperate, delusional lunatic harassing my family. I want him thrown out into the street right now. Call the police and have him arrested for stalking." Two burly security contractors in tight black suits immediately abandoned their posts at the main doors and began power walking toward the center of the ballroom. The elite guests whispered frantically among themselves, stepping back nervously to avoid the impending physical altercation. Megan rushed over, clutching the heavy fabric of her silk gown, her blue eyes wide with frantic embarrassment and fury. "Get him out of here," she shrieked at the approaching guards, pointing a manicured, trembling finger directly at Martin. "He is ruining my entire night." The guards reached out their hands, preparing to grab Martin by the shoulders and physically drag him out of the prestigious gala. "Stop exactly where you are." The voice boomed across the silent ballroom, carrying the undeniable crushing weight of absolute financial authority. The two security guards froze instantly, their heavy hands hovering just inches from the lapels of Martin's tuxedo jacket. The wealthy crowd parted like the Red Sea as Vincent Harrington stepped forward. Vincent was a legendary figure in the national financial world, a billionaire titan whose venture capital firm was the exact desperate lifeline Gregory had been trying to secure all evening to save his failing logistics empire. Vincent was the sole reason this extravagant gala had been organized in the first place. Gregory gasped quickly, wiping the sweat from his brow and arranging his face into a sickeningly apologetic, sycophantic smile. "Mr. Harrington, I am so deeply sorry for this ridiculous, unprovoked interruption. This man is a delusional former relative of a disgruntled warehouse employee. Security is removing him immediately so we can proceed. Please let us return to the VIP lounge." Vincent Harrington did not even look at Gregory. He walked straight past the panicked CEO, completely ignoring his desperately outstretched hand. Vincent stopped directly in front of Martin. The billionaire adjusted his suit jacket, bowed his head slightly in a gesture of profound, unmistakable reverence, and extended his hand. The entire ballroom held its collective breath, watching the impossible unfold. "Mr. Pierce," Vincent said, his deep voice ringing out clearly for every single guest to hear, "it is an absolute honor to welcome you tonight." We were beginning to wonder if the principal owner of the holding firm was actually going to make an appearance. Martin reached out and firmly shook the billionaire's hand, a slow, lethal smile finally breaking across his face. "The pleasure is entirely mine, Vincent," Martin replied smoothly, his calm voice carrying across the marble floor. Gregory's jaw dropped open. His knees buckled slightly as the oxygen completely left his lungs. The elaborate trap had officially sprung shut. The collective gasp that swept through the ballroom was a physical wave of shock. Vincent Harrington released Martin Pierce's hand and slowly turned his formidable gaze toward Gregory Thorne. The billionaire's expression hardened into pure granite. "You invited me here under the guise of an exclusive investment opportunity," Gregory Vincent said, his voice echoing across the marble floor without the need for a microphone. "You claimed your logistics empire was expanding. Yet you failed to mention that you are entirely insolvent, 4 months behind on your commercial lease, and desperately facing a federal eviction by the very man standing in front of you." Vincent adjusted his jacket, his tone dropping to a lethal calm. "My firm does not do business with frauds. Consider every term sheet, every handshake, and every preliminary agreement completely void." The absolute finality of the billionaire's words hit Gregory like a physical blow to the chest. He staggered backward, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish, unable to formulate a single coherent syllable. The silence in the room was absolute, heavy with the weight of Gregory's public execution. Martin did not gloat. He simply bypassed the trembling CEO and walked with unhurried, measured steps directly toward the grand stage set up at the front of the ballroom. A massive presentation screen glowed brightly behind a crystal podium intended for Gregory's triumphant keynote speech. Martin climbed the velvet-lined steps. Gregory, snapping out of his paralysis, lunged forward with a desperate, pathetic cry. "You cannot do this. Security, stop him." But nobody moved. The security guards remained frozen, completely neutralized by the commanding presence of Vincent Harrington. Martin reached the podium, looked down at Gregory, and calmly snatched the microphone from its stand. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen." Martin's deep, resonant voice boomed through the state-of-the-art sound system, commanding the absolute attention of every single person in the room. "I apologize for the interruption to your evening. My name is Martin Pierce. I am the principal owner and sole shareholder of Apex Property Management. Many of you were invited here tonight to pour your capital into Thorne Logistics. You were sold a vision of a thriving, expanding supply chain empire, but you were sold a ghost." Martin raised his hand, giving a subtle signal to the back of the room. From the shadows of the audio-visual booth, Jonathan Reed executed the command. The massive presentation screen behind Martin flickered. The corporate logos and fabricated revenue charts vanished instantly. In their place, a high-resolution scan of a legal document illuminated the ballroom. It was the master commercial lease agreement for the massive industrial complex located on the south side of the city. The text was undeniable. The signature at the bottom of the lessor agreement belonged to Martin Pierce. A collective murmur of utter disbelief rippled through the sea of elite guests. They stared at the screen, then stared at the black man standing at the podium in a $5,000 tuxedo. The man Gregory had just moments ago tried to violently eject as a trespassing beggar was the absolute legal master of the very ground Thorn Logistics operated on. 20 years ago, Martin continued, his voice cutting through the whispers with surgical precision. My late wife and I worked 3 brutal jobs to purchase a barren plot of industrial dirt. We bled for that land. We held it while the city expanded around it. Today, it is the foundation of Thorn Logistics. Gregory Thorn does not own his empire. He rents it from me. And as of 8 o'clock this morning, he is officially in default. He owes $1.2 million in back rent and legal penalties. The man asking for your millions is currently facing an absolute non-negotiable eviction notice. The crowd gasped again. Eyes darted from the undeniable legal proof on the glowing screen directly to Gregory, who was visibly shaking his tailored velvet jacket, suddenly looking like a cheap costume. The facade of the brilliant, untouchable tycoon shattered into a million irreparable pieces right there on the ballroom floor. The wealthy investors Gregory had spent months grooming physically stepped away from him, treating him like a highly contagious disease. Whispers of contempt and outrage hissed through the crowd. "He is a complete fraud," a venture capitalist muttered loudly to his associate. "A multi-million-dollar default. He tried to use our money to pay his landlord a hedge fund," manager sneered, shaking his head in absolute disgust. Gregory's carefully curated social standing evaporated in an instant. He looked around the room, making desperate, frantic eye contact with the men and women he considered his peers, silently begging for a lifeline. But he found nothing except cold, hard rejection. Vincent Harrington turned his back entirely, signaling to his entourage that it was time to leave. The ultimate rejection from the billionaire was the final nail in the coffin. The elite guests began to turn their backs, forming a tight, impenetrable wall of exclusion. Gregory was entirely isolated, stripped of his power, his dignity, and his future. The realization of his complete and total ruin hit him with blinding force. His lungs burned as he gasped for air. He had spent his entire life looking down on people like Martin Pierce, convinced of his own inherent superiority. Now the very man he had openly mocked and degraded had effortlessly dismantled his entire existence with a single undeniable truth. As the crushing weight of public humiliation threatened to bury him, Gregory's survival instinct kicked into a state of pure chaotic overdrive. He knew the federal asset freeze was imminent, if not already active. He had one final desperate play left. Ignoring the hostile stares of the investors, Gregory practically tackled his own daughter, grabbing Megan by the arm and dragging her forcefully behind the towering ice sculptures. His face was pale slick with a terrified sweat. "Listen to me," Gregory hissed directly into her ear, his voice trembling with manic urgency. "The corporate accounts are compromised. We have to execute the contingency plan right now. I have a leather briefcase locked in the private coat room down the hall. It has $300,000 in untraceable cash and the secondary passports. Run to the back, grab the case, and meet me at the loading dock. We are taking the private jet to South America tonight." Megan's eyes widened in sheer panic, the heavy diamond necklace suddenly feeling like a noose around her throat. She looked at her father's deranged expression and nodded frantically, the survival of her own luxury overriding any other thought. She gathered the heavy silk fabric of her emerald gown, turned on her designer heels, and sprinted toward the discreet VIP exit hidden behind the velvet drapery. She pushed the heavy curtain aside, ready to flee into the corridor and escape the nightmare. But she slammed violently into a solid, unmoving chest. Megan stumbled backward, gasping for air as she looked up. Standing perfectly still in the narrow, dimly lit doorway, wearing a crisp catering uniform and holding a silver serving tray, was Derek. He did not look like the broken, blistered victim they had tortured all week. His dark eyes burned with a terrifying, righteous fire. "You are not going anywhere, Megan," Derek said, his voice cold and absolutely unforgiving. Megan stared at the broad chest of the man she had treated like dirt for 2 years. Derek stood in the doorway, an impenetrable wall blocking her only escape route. Panic flared in her blue eyes, quickly morphing into a desperate, calculated rage. If she could not slip away unnoticed, she would have to blow the doors wide open with a spectacle. She took a step back, her chest heaving, and let out a piercing, hysterical scream that cut through the murmurs of the stunned ballroom. "Get away from me!" she shrieked, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. She lunged forward, raising her hand, and slapped Derek across the face with a vicious, echoing crack. The blow was hard enough to snap his head to the side, leaving a bright red mark against his skin. The remaining investors and gala attendees gasped, turning their attention from the stage directly to the VIP exit. Megan immediately burst into theatrical tears, clutching her heavy diamond necklace as if she were suffocating. "Help me!" she cried out to the crowd, pointing a shaking finger at Derek and then up at Martin on the stage. "They are insane. My husband and his father are trying to destroy us. They are abusive, manipulative monsters who set us up. Derek has been terrorizing me at home, and now they are orchestrating this massive lie to steal my family's legacy. Please, someone call security. They are trying to ruin my life." She sobbed perfectly, her shoulders shaking, playing the ultimate victim. She expected the wealthy crowd of her peers to rush to her defense to form a protective shield around the distressed heiress. Derek did not take a single step backward. He did not rub his stinging cheek. He simply turned his head back to face the woman who had made his life a living hell. His dark eyes were cold, completely devoid of the blind devotion he had once held for her. "You are right about one thing," Megan, Derek said, his voice a deep, resonant baritone that easily carried across the hushed ballroom. "This is about a massive lie designed to steal a legacy. But you have the roles reversed." Derek reached inside his catering uniform jacket and pulled out a thick, heavy manila folder. He unclasped the top and pulled out a stack of high-resolution printed documents. With a swift, forceful motion, he threw the papers into the air. They rained down on the polished marble floor, scattering directly at the feet of the elite guests, the hedge fund managers, and the venture capitalists. "Pick them up," Derek commanded the crowd. "Read them." The attendees, driven by morbid curiosity, leaned down and picked up the scattered pages. "The first document is a $200,000 commercial lien," Derek stated loudly, pointing directly at Megan. "My wife secretly took out a second mortgage on our estate using my perfect credit score to pump cash into her father's bankrupt company. She forged my signature on every single page while I was sleeping in the same bed." Murmurs of shock rippled through the crowd as financial experts examined the undeniable proof of wire fraud and identity theft. But Derek was not finished. He reached into his pocket and pulled out one final glossy piece of paper. He held it up high for everyone to see. "And this," Derek's voice dropped to a level of pure righteous disgust, "is the sonogram she shoved into my chest yesterday afternoon. She told me she was 8 weeks pregnant. She threatened to terminate my unborn child if I did not break into my father's house and steal his life savings to cover her father's fraudulent debts." Megan's face went completely white. She lunged for the paper, but Derek easily held it out of her reach. But just like her father's business, Derek continued, his voice echoing like thunder. "This pregnancy is a complete fabrication. My father's legal team traced the origin of this image. She purchased a stock ultrasound photo from an online medical database. There is no baby. There is only a desperate sociopathic criminal willing to fake a pregnancy to extort her own husband." The entire grand ballroom descended into a state of absolute revulsion. The powerful men and women who had just been clinking champagne glasses with Megan now stared at her with unvarnished disgust. The physical evidence of her sociopathic extortion was circulating through their hands. A prominent socialite, a woman Megan had spent months trying to impress to secure a spot on a prestigious charity board, dropped the forged loan document onto the floor as if it were coated in poison. "You are absolutely vile," the socialite whispered, shaking her head in sheer horror. "Faking a pregnancy to extort your husband. You do not belong in civil society." The whispers quickly escalated into a chorus of harsh condemnation. The wealthy elite did not tolerate public scandal, and they certainly did not associate with blatant, sloppy criminals who forged federal bank documents. Megan spun around, her eyes wide and frantic, searching the crowd for a single sympathetic face. She found none. The invisible wall of high society closed entirely, shutting her out permanently. People she thought were her friends physically stepped back, creating a wide circle of isolation around her. Her profound arrogance, the toxic entitlement she had wielded like a weapon against Derek and his father, was entirely crushed into the dirt. The illusion of her superiority shattered into a million irreparable pieces. She stood paralyzed in her expensive emerald gown, trembling violently as the brutal reality of her social and financial execution finally set in. She had no money, no allies, and no escape. The very people she had tried to impress now looked at her as if she were a stain on the marble floor. Her complete destruction was televised live to the only audience she ever cared about. Before Megan could utter another pathetic excuse, the sharp, deafening wail of police sirens pierced the thick glass windows of the Grand Plaza. The sound was not a solitary patrol car. It was the synchronized, overwhelming roar of a massive law enforcement raid. Red and blue emergency lights began to flash violently against the high ballroom windows, illuminating the terrified faces of the remaining guests. The federal authorities had arrived to execute the warrants Jonathan Reed had secured that very afternoon. Gregory Thorne stood entirely frozen near the center ice sculpture. He heard the sirens multiplying outside, completely surrounding the building and blocking every possible exit. His offshore accounts were frozen. His company was evicted. His daughter's fraud was exposed. He was staring down the barrel of a 20-year federal prison sentence with absolutely no way out. The animalistic panic inside Gregory completely took over. He let out a primal, desperate roar of absolute rage. He shoved a heavy cocktail table aside, sending crystal glasses shattering across the marble floor. He reached a trembling hand into the inner breast pocket of his plush velvet dinner jacket. The crowd shrieked and scattered in blind terror as Gregory pulled out a sleek black compact handgun. His eyes were wild, bloodshot, and completely devoid of reason. He had lost everything, and in his deranged mind he was determined to make sure the man who orchestrated his downfall paid the ultimate price. He did not point it at the heavy wooden doors or the approaching sirens. He raised his arm, his finger shaking violently on the trigger, and pointed the weapon directly at the chest of the man standing calmly on the stage. He aimed the gun straight at Martin Pierce. The standoff froze the entire room in a moment of sheer, breathless terror. The sheer terror erupted instantly. The moment Gregory raised the black handgun, the opulent ballroom descended into absolute primal chaos. High society elites who had just been sipping vintage champagne now shrieked in blind panic. Men in expensive tuxedos shoved each other aside, diving behind overturned catering tables and marble pillars. Women in designer gowns slipped on the polished floor, abandoning their silk heels in a frantic, desperate stampede toward the service exits. The string quartet cellist dropped his priceless instrument, the wood splintering with a loud crack that was entirely swallowed by the deafening chorus of screams. But amidst the swirling vortex of hysteria, Martin Pierce did not move a single muscle. He stood on the elevated stage, perfectly centered behind the crystal podium, looking down at the desperate, sweating man, aiming a loaded weapon directly at his chest. Martin did not raise his hands in surrender. He did not take a step backward. He did not even blink. His dark eyes were as cold and unforgiving as absolute zero. He stared down the barrel of the gun with an expression of profound, undisturbed indifference. He had spent his entire life facing down systemic hurdles, crushing poverty, and men who thought they held all the power. A broken, pathetic coward with a shaking gun was nothing but a minor inconvenience. Gregory stood completely unhinged, his arm trembling violently, the heavy velvet of his dinner jacket soaked in a terrified sweat. He screamed at Martin, ordering him to undo the financial ruin he had just unleashed. But Martin refused to give Gregory even a fraction of an ounce of fear. The silence radiating from the stage was a heavy, suffocating weapon of its own, proving to every single person cowering in the room who truly held the absolute power. With a deadly, terrifying stillness, Martin leaned closer to the microphone. He did not try to talk Gregory down from the ledge. He did not negotiate with a cornered rat. Instead, his deep, resonant voice boomed through the massive speakers, cutting straight through the frantic sobs of the hiding guests. 4009-278155. Martin recited the long string of numbers with surgical, devastating precision. Gregory's eyes widened in sheer, unadulterated horror. The gun in his hand wavered slightly as his brain struggled to process the digits echoing off the vaulted ceiling. That is the exact routing and primary account number for your supposedly untraceable offshore holding account at the Banco de la Nación in Buenos Aires, Argentina. Martin announced, his voice a lethal hammer striking the final nail into Gregory's coffin. You thought you were the smartest man in the room, Gregory. You thought you could liquidate the remaining assets of Thorne Logistics, load $300,000 in cash into a briefcase, and board a private jet to South America tonight. You thought you could leave my son to rot in a federal penitentiary while you lived out your days on a beach financed by our blood and sweat. Martin gripped the edges of the crystal podium, leaning forward like a judge delivering an inescapable execution. But you severely underestimated the people you tried to destroy. My legal team intercepted your corporate communications 12 hours ago. We handed that exact account number along with the undeniable proof of your massive wire fraud directly to the federal authorities. That offshore account you are betting your entire life and freedom on was officially frozen and seized by the FBI exactly 60 minutes ago. Every single cent of your escape fund is gone. The private jet you chartered has been grounded on the tarmac. Your pilot is currently in federal custody. You have absolutely no money, no company, no escape route, and nowhere left to run. The absolute finality of Martin's words struck Gregory with the destructive force of a localized earthquake. The psychological defeat occurred long before the physical one. Gregory's mouth opened in a silent, agonizing scream of total realization. He was completely stripped of his empire, his wealth, and his freedom. He was nothing but a hollow shell of a man standing in a ruined ballroom. The heavy black handgun, once a desperate symbol of his remaining control, suddenly felt like an anchor dragging him straight to the bottom of the ocean. His arm dropped slowly to his side. His knees buckled under the crushing weight of his absolute ruin, hitting the hard marble floor with a dull, hollow thud. He did not even have the strength to lift the weapon again. Just as his spirit completely shattered, the heavy gold-leafed doors of the Grand Plaza Ballroom exploded inward. Tactical units from the federal law enforcement agencies flooded the room, their heavy combat boots pounding against the polished stone. Blinding white tactical lights pierced the dim ambiance, crisscrossing directly onto Gregory's chest. "Drop the weapon!" A commanding voice roared through a megaphone, echoing fiercely over the wailing sirens outside. Gregory did not resist. He simply let the gun slip from his trembling fingers. The metal weapon clattered harmlessly across the marble, sliding far out of his reach. In a matter of seconds, heavily armed officers swarmed the ruined CEO. They tackled him roughly to the floor, pressing his face into the spilled champagne and broken glass. Gregory did not fight back. He lay there gasping for air, staring blankly at the crystal chandeliers above as his hands were forcefully pulled behind his back. The cold, heavy steel of the handcuffs clicked loudly around his wrists, locking him into the grim reality of his immediate and permanent future. As the sharp metallic snap of the handcuffs finalized Gregory's total destruction, the chaotic reality of the situation finally registered in Megan's calculating mind. Her father was being dragged away by federal agents. Her husband had publicly exposed her sociopathic extortion and completely destroyed her standing in high society. She possessed absolutely no money, no social leverage, and no future. Her survival instinct, honed by years of manipulating everyone around her, immediately pivoted to its final, most pathetic tactic. She ignored the armed officers and the hiding guests gathering the heavy emerald silk of her designer gown. Megan rushed frantically toward the base of the grand stage, throwing herself onto the hard marble floor directly at Martin's feet. She completely abandoned any lingering shred of her elite pride. She weaponized her tears, sobbing loudly and violently as she grabbed the perfectly tailored fabric of Martin's tuxedo trousers. "Martin, please," she wailed, her voice cracking with a sickeningly sweet, desperate plea for mercy. "You have to protect me. You know I had nothing to do with this. My father forced me into everything. I was just a victim of his ambition. You are the kindest, most generous man I know. You are the greatest father in the entire world. Please look at me. We are family. You cannot let them take me away. I will do whatever you want. I will be the perfect daughter-in-law. Just save me from this nightmare." Martin did not take a single step backward. He did not try to pull his leg out of her desperate, frantic grip. He simply stood tall on the edge of the stage and looked down at the woman who had orchestrated his son's absolute misery. He did not see a frightened victim. He saw a venomous snake that had finally run out of places to hide. The expression on his face was completely devoid of sympathy, devoid of anger, and devoid of forgiveness. He looked at her with a chilling, unadulterated contempt that cut far deeper than any physical blow ever could. Megan's desperate pleas echoed off the cold marble floor, a pathetic symphony of lies attempting to rewrite history. She clung to the immaculately tailored fabric of Martin's trousers, her tears leaving dark, wet stains against the midnight blue wool. She expected her manufactured vulnerability to work just as it had worked on her husband for 2 entire years. But Martin did not flinch. He did not reach down to comfort the woman who had intentionally made his son's life a living nightmare. Instead, he slowly and deliberately peeled her manicured fingers off his leg, stepping back to sever the physical contact entirely. His expression remained utterly impassive, an impenetrable fortress of righteous judgment. He turned his gaze away from her sobbing form and looked directly at the lead federal agent coordinating Gregory's arrest. Officer Martin said, his voice echoing clearly through the ruined ballroom. "You are missing a key conspirator in this federal operation." Martin raised a hand, signaling his attorney, Jonathan Reed. Jonathan immediately stepped forward from the shadows of the audio-visual booth, carrying the thick, heavy manila folder that contained the irrefutable evidence of the Thorne family's financial crimes. He handed the dossier directly to the federal agent. Inside that file, Martin stated, his tone carrying the weight of an executioner's gavel. "You will find the original notarized documents proving that this woman committed massive bank fraud. She willfully committed identity theft, forging her husband's signature to secure a $200,000 commercial lien against his personal estate. She actively colluded with her father to funnel that stolen equity into his failing logistics empire to secure a fraudulent flight risk fund." The federal agent opened the folder, his eyes rapidly scanning the highlighted signatures, the IP address logs, and the undeniable paper trail of the fraudulent mortgage. He snapped the folder shut and nodded sharply to two approaching officers. "Arrest her," the agent commanded. The two heavily armed officers stepped forward, flanking Megan on both sides. They reached down, grabbing her securely by the arms to hoist her up from the marble floor. The sudden physical reality of her arrest shattered the last remaining fragments of her composure. Megan shrieked, a wild, feral sound of pure, unadulterated panic. She began to thrash violently, fighting against the officer's iron grip. Her expensive emerald silk gown, the very symbol of her manufactured elite status, twisted and tore at the seams as she kicked wildly against the polished floor. The heavy diamond necklace she had flaunted all evening swung erratically, catching the bright tactical lights as she was dragged backward. "You cannot do this to me!" Megan screamed, her perfectly styled hair falling into a tangled, disheveled mess across her tear-streaked face. "I am a Thorne. I belong in this society. You are making a huge mistake." She clawed at the air, desperately reaching out toward the remaining high society guests, who were silently watching her complete destruction from the periphery. No one stepped forward. No one offered a single word of defense. She was entirely abandoned by the very world she had sacrificed her soul to impress. The officers swiftly overpowered her frantic resistance. They forced her hands behind her back. The sharp, unmistakable metallic click of the handcuffs snapping shut around her delicate wrists echoed sharply through the ballroom. It was the sound of absolute, irrevocable defeat. As the officers began to march her toward the exit, dragging her ruined silk gown across the spilled champagne and broken glass, Martin stepped directly into her path. The officers paused for a brief second. Martin leaned in close, his dark eyes locking onto her terrified, ruined face. He did not yell. He delivered his final judgment with a whisper colder than the winter wind. "A few days ago, you stood in the shade and told me that my son needed to learn his place," Martin said smoothly, his voice a lethal blade slicing through her hysteria. "You said he needed to learn how the world works from the very bottom of society." Martin straightened his posture, looking down at the handcuffs binding her wrists. "You were absolutely right about one thing, Megan. Learning from the bottom of society builds character. And a federal prison cell is a spectacular place for you to start." The officers pulled her forward, dragging her out the shattered double doors as she wailed in absolute despair. Within minutes, the heavy oak doors of the Grand Plaza Ballroom swung shut, sealing out the flashing red and blue lights of the police cruisers departing into the night. The grand space, which had just hosted the pinnacle of the city's elite society, was now nothing more than a cavernous, empty tomb of shattered arrogance. The string quartet had long since fled the scene. The remaining wealthy guests had vanished into the shadows, eager to distance themselves from the catastrophic legal fallout of the Thorne family. Overturned cocktail tables, crushed floral arrangements, and pools of spilled vintage champagne littered the expensive marble floor. The deafening silence that settled over the ruined venue was heavy, yet profoundly peaceful. Derek stood near the center of the room, still wearing the cheap catering uniform Gregory had forced him to wear as a tool of ultimate humiliation. He stared at the empty doorway where his wife and his father-in-law had just been dragged away in federal handcuffs. The adrenaline that had kept him standing for the past 2 hours suddenly evaporated, leaving behind a bone-deep, overwhelming exhaustion that threatened to pull him down to the floor. His legs trembled uncontrollably. He walked slowly toward one of the few remaining upright chairs near the edge of the stage and collapsed into it. He rested his elbows on his knees, burying his face in his raw, blistered hands. But as he sat there in the quiet aftermath of the storm, a strange, powerful sensation began to rise in his chest. It was not grief over a lost marriage. It was not fear of a financial ruin that no longer existed. It was the absolute, undeniable realization of total liberation. The toxic chains that had bound him to a family of sociopathic manipulators were completely shattered. He had lost his marriage and he had faced unimaginable public humiliation, but he had finally reclaimed his soul. He was entirely free. Martin descended the velvet-lined steps of the grand stage, his footsteps echoing softly in the vast, empty ballroom. He walked over to where his son was sitting, taking in the exhausted droop of Derek's shoulders and the bruised, battered state of his hands resulting from the brutal warehouse labor. Martin did not offer empty platitudes or hollow words of comfort. He knew that Derek had just walked through a crucible of fire, and surviving it required more than just a pat on the back. It required a new foundation. Martin reached into the inner pocket of his midnight blue tuxedo jacket. He pulled out a heavy silver keyring holding a brand new set of electronic security fobs and solid brass master keys. With a quiet, deliberate motion, Martin dropped the keys directly onto the glass table next to Derek. The metallic clatter broke the heavy silence of the room. Derek slowly lifted his head, his dark eyes shifting from the shiny new keys up to his father's stoic face. He looked at the keys, confusion mingling with the lingering exhaustion in his gaze. "What are these?" Derek asked, his voice hoarse and raw from the night's explosive confrontations. "Those belong to the Master Executive Suite and the primary loading bays of the South Side Industrial Complex." Martin replied, his tone steady and commanding. "Gregory Thorne is currently sitting in a federal holding cell and his company is officially bankrupt. By tomorrow morning, that entire facility will be completely empty, swept clean of their lies, their failures, and their arrogance. The land belongs to me, but the future of what gets built on it belongs to you." Martin placed a firm, reassuring hand on his son's shoulder, giving it a strong, anchoring squeeze. "The fake empire has been burned to the ground. Go home, Derek. Get some rest. Sleep for as long as you need tonight." Martin turned toward the exit, looking back over his shoulder with a fierce, proud gleam in his eye. "Because tomorrow morning we are going to start the real work." 3 days after the spectacular collapse at the Grand Plaza, the complete destruction of Thorne Logistics was broadcast across every major financial news network in the state. The headlines were absolutely merciless. Gregory Thorne, the once untouchable titan of the supply chain industry, had officially filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy from inside a federal holding cell. The federal asset freeze executed by Jonathan Reed had worked with flawless, devastating efficiency. Without access to his offshore accounts, Gregory could not cover his massive debts, his payroll, or the staggering $1.2 million eviction penalty. Federal agents had spent the weekend raiding the corporate offices, boxing up hard drives, and seizing whatever physical assets remained on the property to satisfy defrauded investors. The illusion of the Thorne family wealth was entirely shattered, exposed to the world as a fragile house of cards built on predatory loans, unpaid leases, and blatant wire fraud. They had absolutely nothing left. Their sprawling luxury estate was slated for immediate foreclosure by the bank. The designer cars were repossessed straight out of their driveway. The elite social circles that had once eagerly accepted their extravagant invitations now treated their names like a highly contagious disease, actively scrubbing the Thorne family from their country club registries and charity board websites. Gregory and Megan had lost their money, their freedom, and their highly manufactured dignity in a single catastrophic evening. Derek sat at his kitchen table drinking a cup of black coffee as he read the morning paper. He did not feel an ounce of pity. He felt the cold, hard satisfaction of absolute justice. The phone on the table suddenly buzzed, disrupting the quiet morning. The caller ID flashed an incoming call from the county correctional facility. Megan's voice on the automated jail phone line was entirely devoid of her usual venomous arrogance. She sounded frantic, hyperventilating as she begged Derek to come to the county detention center and post her bail. She promised that things would be different, claiming that the horrifying reality of a concrete cell had completely changed her perspective. Derek agreed to visit her, not out of lingering affection, but to deliver a final fatal blow to her manipulation. He drove to the dreary, heavily fortified facility, walking through the sterile security checkpoints with a calm, unwavering focus. He was directed to a bleak, fluorescent-lit visitation room, separated by thick, smudge-covered plexiglass. A few moments later, a guard escorted Megan into the booth. The sight of her was jarring. The glamorous, untouchable heiress who had sneered at him from the shade of a pop-up tent was entirely gone. She wore a baggy, bright orange jumpsuit. Her blonde hair was tangled and greasy, her face pale and completely devoid of the expensive makeup she used as a shield. She picked up the heavy black receiver, her hands shaking violently. "Derek," she cried, pressing her hand against the glass. "Thank God you came. You have to get me out of here. It is a nightmare. The guards treat me like an animal. My father's lawyers are not returning my calls. You have to talk to your dad. Tell him I was manipulated. Tell him I will sign whatever he wants if he drops the charges and posts my bail. Please, I am your wife." Derek picked up his end of the phone. He looked at her not with anger but with absolute freezing indifference. He reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents. He slid them through the narrow metal slot at the bottom of the plexiglass divider. Megan looked down, her desperate smile instantly vanishing. "These are not bail papers," Derek stated, his voice a low, steady rumble that commanded the cramped room. "This is a petition for an expedited at-fault divorce. Attached to it is an absolute no-contact restraining order. You are going to sign them right now." Megan stared at the bold legal print, her breath hitching in her throat. "You cannot do this to me," she gasped, looking back up at him with wild, terrified eyes. "I have absolutely nothing. I have no money for a lawyer. If you abandon me in here, I will rot in federal prison for a decade." Derek did not flinch at her mounting hysteria. "You made your choice when you forged my signature to steal $200,000, he replied, his tone devoid of any mercy. "You made your choice when you handed me a fake ultrasound and threatened to murder an unborn child to extort me into robbing my own father. You did not see me as a husband, Megan. You saw me as a disposable shield. Now you get to experience exactly what happens when that shield is permanently removed." Megan slammed her palms against the plexiglass, her face contorting into an ugly mask of pure panic and rage. "You owe me!" she shrieked, her voice cracking over the poor audio connection. "We gave you a life. You would be nothing without the Thorne family." Derek stood up, buttoning his jacket with slow, deliberate precision. "The Thorne family is dead," he stated coldly. "You are nothing but a convicted felon wearing an orange jumpsuit. Sign the divorce papers and give them to your public defender. If you try to fight this in court, I will personally ensure the judge sees every single piece of evidence regarding your sociopathic extortion. Have a terrible life, Megan." He placed the heavy black receiver back onto the hook, instantly severing the audio connection. Megan's mouth opened in a silent, feral scream. She pounded her fists violently against the thick glass, her face red and streaked with terrified tears as she realized her absolute destruction was finalized. Derek did not look back. He turned his back on her frantic thrashing and walked out of the visitation room, the heavy steel door clicking shut behind him, locking her away in her self-made hell forever. Derek stepped out of the county detention center and took a deep breath of the warm summer air. The suffocating weight he had carried for the past 2 years was entirely gone. He got into his car and drove directly toward the south side of the city, heading for the industrial complex that had once housed Gregory's empire. When he pulled through the massive iron gates, the transformation was already underway. The arrogant, towering signs bearing the Thorne Logistics name had been violently torn down, leaving only faded, empty metal frames against the concrete facades. The parking lot, once filled with Gregory's luxury vehicles, was now occupied by a fleet of heavy-duty utility trucks. Derek parked his car and walked toward the primary loading docks. Standing in the center of the vast, sun-baked asphalt was Martin. He was no longer dressed in the intimidating tuxedo from the gala, nor was he wearing his faded retirement clothes. He wore a crisp, professional button-down shirt and held a rolled-up set of architectural blueprints. Surrounding Martin was a specialized team of structural engineers and commercial construction managers, all wearing hard hats and pointing toward the massive warehouse bays. Martin noticed Derek approaching and broke away from the group. He walked over to his son, an expression of profound pride and unstoppable ambition burning in his dark eyes. "The garbage has been officially cleared out," Martin said, handing Derek a fresh, unrolled blueprint of the facility. "The engineers have already assessed the structural integrity of the main bays. The foundation is rock solid, and the land is ready for a complete overhaul." Derek looked down at the blueprints, his heart racing with a new, exhilarating kind of adrenaline. It was time to build an empire of their own. Derek rolled up the blueprints and set them firmly on the hood of his father's truck. He looked up at the main administrative building. Bolted heavily above the glass double doors was the last remaining piece of the old regime, a massive brushed aluminum sign bearing the name Thorn Logistics. It was a lingering toxic stain on the property. Martin followed his son's gaze. He walked over to the back of his pickup truck, pulled out a heavy steel crowbar, and handed a thick, heavy-duty wrench directly to Derek. The engineering crew stepped back, understanding the deeply personal nature of the moment. Derek and Martin walked side by side toward the entrance. They did not call for the maintenance crew. They did not hire outside contractors for this specific task. This was entirely their burden to break. Derek climbed the short aluminum extension ladder, wedging the sharp edge of the wrench behind the heavy metal brackets securing the letter T to the concrete facade. He pulled back with all his physical strength, his muscles straining as the industrial bolts groaned and snapped violently. Martin stood right beside him on a second ladder, driving the steel crowbar behind the word logistics, leveraging his entire weight against the brick. Together, father and son worked in a synchronized, methodical silence. They pried every single aluminum letter off the wall, letting the heavy metal pieces crash loudly onto the hot asphalt below. When the final letter hit the ground, Derek climbed down his chest, heaving with exertion. He gathered the broken, twisted pieces of Gregory's fabricated legacy in his arms. He walked over to the massive industrial garbage truck idling near the loading bays and threw the shattered metal directly into the crushing compactor. He watched the hydraulic press grind the name into unrecognizable scrap. The physical manifestation of his nightmare was permanently erased from the earth. Martin walked over to the roaring garbage truck, handing a cold bottle of water to Derek. He looked at the vast, cleared-out warehouse space, then turned his intense, dark eyes toward his son. "I am not handing you a gift," Derek Martin said, his voice cutting cleanly through the noise of the industrial lot. "I am handing you a crucible. You survived the fire, but now you have to forge the steel. The deed to this land remains permanently in my holding company, but the operational keys, the hiring authority, and the entire future of this logistics complex belong exclusively to you. You are the chief executive now. Build it the right way." Derek held the cold water bottle, feeling the immense crushing weight of the responsibility settling onto his shoulders. It was a stark contrast to the fake, powerless title Gregory had slapped on him just weeks ago to use him as a legal shield. Derek looked at the vast expanse of concrete and steel. "Why this exact plot of land?" Derek asked quietly. "Out of all the commercial real estate in the city, why did you buy this specific industrial yard 20 years ago?" Martin looked down at the hot asphalt, a profound, heavy sorrow softening his sharp features. He took a deep breath, the memories flooding back with fierce clarity. "Because of your mother," Martin answered, his voice dropping into a reverent whisper. "Before you were born, this entire area was a dilapidated, dangerous rail yard. Your mother worked 3 grueling shifts a day. She scrubbed floors in the financial district from dawn until dusk, and she sorted heavy freight on these exact train tracks all night. We barely had enough to eat, but she saved every single quarter in an old coffee can hidden under our bed. She used to walk across this broken concrete, her hands bleeding, and her boots worn entirely through, telling me that one day this dirt would connect the entire city. When she got sick, she made me promise to use her life savings to buy the first parcel of this land at a county auction. She died before the zoning laws changed, before the highways were built, before any of this became a gold mine. She bled into this dirt, Derek. Her sweat built the foundation that Gregory Thorne arrogantly tried to steal. I let him lease it because his exorbitant rent money paid for your college tuition, but I was never going to let him keep it. This is your mother's legacy." The profound weight of his father's words struck Derek with absolute shattering clarity. He looked down at the scarred, blistered skin on his own hands, the residual damage from the brutal unloading Gregory had forced him to endure. He had felt so deeply humiliated that day, but now, standing on the very ground his mother had sacrificed her life to secure, he felt an overwhelming, fierce sense of pride. He finally understood the fundamental difference between the illusion of wealth and the reality of true power. Gregory and Megan had draped themselves in velvet jackets, silk gowns, and designer jewelry, projecting an image of absolute superiority while secretly drowning in fraudulent debt. Their power was a hollow, fragile mask. True power was the quiet, relentless endurance of a woman saving quarters in a coffee can. True power was a father enduring vicious insults in perfect silence, while holding the absolute legal authority to crush his enemies with a single phone call. Derek stood taller, his spine straightening as he completely shed the last lingering remnants of the broken, subservient man he used to be. He looked directly at his father, his dark eyes burning with absolute, unwavering resolve. "I will not let her down," Derek said, his voice a solid, resonant vow. "I am going to build a logistics network that actually honors her sacrifice. We will hire honest workers, we will pay them fairly, and we will run this industry the exact way it was meant to be run. No fake wealth, no corporate extortion, just relentless, honest execution." Martin smiled, a rare, genuine expression of profound paternal pride illuminating his face. He reached out and firmly grasped his son's shoulder. "I know you will," Martin replied smoothly. "You are a Pierce. You are built for this." Before Derek could ask about the immediate hiring protocols, a sharp ringtone cut through the humid afternoon air. Martin pulled his cell phone from his pocket, glancing at the screen. It was Jonathan Reed. Martin answered, putting the call on speaker so Derek could hear the sharp, efficient voice of their attorney. "Martin, we have a highly unexpected development," Jonathan stated immediately, the rustle of thick paperwork audible in the background. "The corporate registry just processed the official dissolution of Thorn Logistics, and I just received a direct priority phone call from the executive offices of Harrington Ventures." Derek's eyes widened instantly. Vincent Harrington was the legendary billionaire who had publicly humiliated Gregory at the gala, the apex investor who had shattered the Thorn family facade in front of the entire elite society. "What does Mr. Harrington want?" Martin asked calmly, completely unbothered by the sheer magnitude of the billionaire's name. Jonathan let out a rare, sharp bark of laughter. "He wants your son, Martin." Vincent Harrington was thoroughly impressed by how Derek stood his ground at the gala and brutally exposed the extortion. Harrington just acquired a massive fleet of overseas cargo ships, and he desperately needs a domestic operational hub to manage his entire eastern seaboard distribution. He does not want to deal with established, bloated corporate firms. He wants a hungry, honest operator with a clean slate and ironclad infrastructure. He is offering a 10-year exclusive supply chain contract, and he specifically requested that Derek Pierce spearhead the entire operation. Martin looked at his son, the corners of his mouth turning up in a victorious, knowing smirk. Derek stared at the phone, his heart hammering with a fierce, unstoppable adrenaline. The ultimate vindication had just arrived at their doorstep. "Tell Mr. Harrington to send the contract," Derek said loudly toward the speaker, his voice brimming with absolute newly forged authority. "We are open for business." 6 months later, the heavy oak doors of the federal courthouse swung shut, sealing the fate of the Thorn family forever. Inside the austere wood-paneled courtroom, the air was thick with the suffocating reality of absolute justice. Gregory Thorn stood before the federal judge, his once immaculate posture completely shattered. He wore a standard-issue orange jumpsuit that hung loosely on his dramatically thinned frame. Beside him stood Megan, her blonde hair dull and unkempt, her hands trembling violently in heavy steel cuffs. The judge looked down from the bench, his expression devoid of any leniency. He did not see a powerful logistics tycoon or an elite socialite. He saw two desperate, predatory criminals who had built an empire on fraud, extortion, and extreme financial abuse. The judge delivered the final sentencing with a booming, inescapable resonance. For orchestrating massive wire fraud, commercial extortion, and the attempted financial ruin of his own son-in-law, Gregory was sentenced to 15 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary. The gavel slammed down, echoing like a gunshot. For her active role in identity theft, bank fraud, and the sociopathic fabrication of medical records to execute a blackmail scheme, Megan was handed a severe sentence of 8 years behind bars without the possibility of parole. Megan collapsed into her chair, letting out a hollow, agonizing wail that bounced off the courtroom walls. Gregory simply stared blankly at the mahogany table, completely paralyzed by the utter destruction of his life. They had gambled everything on their inherent superiority and their belief that they could crush anyone beneath them without consequence. Now they were permanently stripped of their wealth, their freedom, and their names. They were nothing but federal inmates locked away in a cage of their own making. Martin and Derek Pierce walked shoulder to shoulder through the heavy brass doors of the courthouse and stepped out into the blinding, brilliant sunlight of a crisp autumn morning. The sharp air filled their lungs, carrying the undeniable, intoxicating scent of absolute freedom. They did not look back at the transport vans idling near the side entrance, waiting to haul Gregory and Megan away to their respective prisons. There was no need to gloat or revel in the misery of the defeated. The universe had already balanced the scales with ruthless precision. As they descended the wide granite steps of the federal building, Derek buttoned his tailored suit jacket. He held his head high, his dark eyes reflecting a profound, unbreakable peace. He was no longer the exhausted, blistered man struggling to survive under the crushing weight of a toxic marriage. He was a survivor who had walked through the fire and emerged entirely forged in steel. He had watched the woman who tried to destroy him face the ultimate consequence of her extreme arrogance. Megan and Gregory had truly believed their wealth made them untouchable. They had looked at Derek and Martin and seen only targets to be exploited, stepping stones to be crushed into the dirt. They mistook kindness for weakness and silence for submission. But the Pierces had taught them the most devastating lesson of their lives. Arrogance is a fragile glass house easily shattered by the heavy stone of undeniable truth. Martin walked beside his son with a steady, commanding rhythm. He felt a deep, resonant satisfaction settling into his bones. He had protected his bloodline. He had safeguarded the grueling, painful sacrifices his late wife had made all those years ago. The predators who had tried to consume his family were now buried under the crushing weight of the federal justice system, stripped of their fake prestige and left with absolutely nothing. The war was officially over, and the villains had paid the ultimate, inescapable price for their boundless greed. They reached their vehicle, the city sprawling out before them, completely open and ripe with endless possibility. The dark, suffocating chapter of Thorn Logistics was permanently closed, replaced by a horizon entirely dictated by their own rules. The scene at the Southside Industrial Complex was a roaring testament to their hard-won victory. The vast asphalt lot, once a silent graveyard of Gregory's failing ambitions, was now a thundering epicenter of elite commercial logistics. A relentless, highly organized stream of heavy freight trucks rolled through the freshly painted iron gates, bearing the striking new logo of Pierce Continental Freight. The loading docks buzzed with synchronized high-energy activity. Forklifts darted expertly between towering aisles of legitimate high-value inventory. Standing at the center of the sprawling concrete floor was Derek. He wore a crisp, dark polo shirt and a functional utility jacket holding a digital manifest tablet. He was no longer pushing boxes in the blistering heat to earn a fraction of respect. He was the undisputed chief executive officer commanding a massive, highly efficient workforce. As he walked down the central corridor, dock workers and shift supervisors greeted him with genuine, unforced respect. He knew their names, he paid them fair industry-leading wages, and he ran the entire operation with a transparent, ironclad integrity that Gregory Thorn could never have comprehended. There was no fear on the warehouse floor, only the shared, powerful momentum of a team building something real. Derek expertly directed a fleet of outbound cargo destined for Vincent Harrington's Eastern Seaboard distribution network, fulfilling the massive exclusive contract with flawless precision. He moved with a confident, effortless authority completely in his element. He was a leader forged in adversity, guiding his people with a steady hand. The facility was alive, breathing with the rhythmic pulse of honest, relentless hard work. It was a thriving, expanding empire built firmly on the sacred dirt his mother had bled to acquire, and Derek was ensuring that her legacy would stand for generations to come. Just outside the main administrative building, tucked beneath the shade of a massive ancient oak tree that had survived the city's relentless expansion, sat Martin Pierce. He rested comfortably on a smooth stone bench, his posture relaxed, but carrying the undeniable gravity of a king surveying his prosperous kingdom. In his weathered hands he held a simple ceramic mug, taking a slow, measured sip of bitter black coffee. The rich, dark aroma mingled with the scent of exhaust and hot asphalt, the very smell of industry and progress. Martin watched his son through the large glass bay windows of the warehouse, observing the commanding, respectful way Derek guided the massive logistics operation. A profound, unwavering peace settled completely over Martin's soul. He had played the long game, enduring years of invisible labor and absorbing the sharp, arrogant insults of a family that thought they owned the world. As he took another sip of his coffee, a final, unshakable thought resonated powerfully in his sharp mind. Dignity is not found in the color of your skin, the brand of your suit, or the manufactured prestige of your background. Dignity lies in how you bury those who try to drag you down into the mud, using nothing but the terrifying weight of your silence and the execution of your absolute power. He had not needed to scream to throw tantrums or to beg for respect. He had simply let the wicked dig their own graves, and then he had quietly buried them in it. Martin leaned back against the solid stone, the warm afternoon sun washing over his face. The battle was won, the legacy was secured, and the Pierce family finally stepped forward into an unwritten future of absolute glory and boundless freedom. The final and perhaps most crucial lesson to extract from the ashes of the Thorne family empire is the catastrophic danger of mistaking silence for weakness. In a world obsessed with loud declarations of status, wealth, and power, society has been conditioned to believe that the loudest person in the room is the one who holds all the cards. Gregory and Megan Thorne built their entire existence on this fundamental flaw. They wore their designer suits and emerald gowns like suits of armor, projecting an image of absolute invincibility. They spoke in demands through tantrums when challenged, and actively sought to humiliate anyone they deemed beneath them to validate their own fragile egos. They looked at a man like Martin Pierce, a man with calloused hands, faded work boots, and a quiet demeanor, and they saw a victim. They saw a stepping stone. They equated his lack of ostentation with a total lack of capability. This is the tragic hubris of the arrogant. They are so blinded by the glare of their own manufactured spotlight that they completely fail to notice the structural integrity of the ground they are standing on. Martin Pierce understood a profound truth that the Thorne family could never comprehend. True, unyielding power is an invisible architect. It does not need to scream to be heard. It does not need to flaunt its bank statements or belittle a warehouse worker to validate its existence. When Gregory insulted Martin at the loading dock, a lesser man would have exploded into a fit of rage. A fragile ego would have immediately yelled about the master lease agreement, desperate to prove his superiority and defend his pride right then and there. But reacting to a provocateur is exactly how you surrender your power to them. It allows them to dictate the terms of engagement. Martin chose the path of the apex predator. He absorbed the insult, held his tongue, and walked away. He let Gregory revel in his hollow victory, knowing that a predator is most vulnerable when it believes it has already won the hunt. By remaining perfectly silent, Martin allowed his enemies to continue digging their own graves with unprecedented speed and enthusiasm. Underestimation is the greatest tactical advantage you can ever possess. When toxic, narcissistic individuals look at you and see someone powerless, they drop their defenses. They become sloppy. They leave their financial ledgers exposed. They forge federal documents with reckless abandon, and they make careless, fatal mistakes because they do not believe you possess the intelligence or the resources to hold them accountable. There is a specific psychological warfare inherent in total silence. Abusers like Gregory and Megan feed on emotional reactions. They want to see you cry, they want to see you defend yourself, and they want to see you break. It validates their twisted sense of supremacy. When you deny them that reaction, you deny them their oxygen. They begin to spiral. They escalate their behavior, pushing harder and harder to elicit a response which ultimately leads to their own catastrophic exposure. By refusing to engage in their theatrical drama, Martin forced them to operate in a vacuum where their only remaining enemy was their own unchecked greed. Furthermore, this story serves as a stark warning about the danger of attaching your self-worth to conditional external validation. Megan Thorne derived her entire identity from her credit limit and her social standing at the country club. She was so terrified of losing her elite status that she was willing to fake a pregnancy and destroy her own husband to maintain the illusion of wealth. Her morality was entirely transactional. When you build your life on the shifting sands of public perception, you are constantly living in fear of the tide. You become a slave to your own facade. The moment the federal asset freeze hit, Megan had absolutely nothing left to fall back on. She had no genuine skills, no real friends, and no internal moral compass. Her collapse was not just financial, it was entirely existential. Derek, on the other hand, had to learn the agonizing lesson that love cannot be bought and respect cannot be negotiated with people who lack a soul. He allowed himself to be financially and emotionally manipulated because he wanted to believe in the illusion of a perfect family. He thought hard work and compliance would eventually earn him a seat at the table. It took the profound shock of extreme betrayal to teach him that you cannot reason with a parasite. You can only cut it off completely. For anyone navigating a toxic relationship, an abusive workplace, or a family dynamic poisoned by manipulation, the blueprint laid out by Martin Pierce is a masterclass in survival and ultimate victory. Do not engage in their noise. When they hurl insults, do not rush to defend yourself. When they try to belittle your achievements or mock your background, let them speak into the void. Use that energy instead to quietly and methodically build your own fortress. Secure your finances. Document every transgression. Gather your evidence in the dark. Educate yourself. Strengthen your mind and prepare for the moment when you can sever the ties completely and irrevocably. The best revenge is not a screaming match in a driveway. The best revenge is executing a flawless, undeniable strategy that dismantles their control over you permanently. It is the realization that you never needed their validation in the first place. Ultimately, the legacy you leave behind is not measured by the aluminum signs bolted to a corporate building or the velvet jackets hanging in your closet. It is measured by the resilience of your character when everything is stripped away. Martin's late wife did not have a fancy title, but her blood and sweat laid the concrete foundation for an empire. She understood the value of sacrifice, of enduring temporary hardship for a permanent legacy. That is the kind of wealth that cannot be seized by a federal warrant or washed away by a social scandal. It is the kind of wealth that is forged in the fire of genuine hardship and tempered by unwavering integrity. As you walk through your own life, facing down your own versions of Gregory and Megan Thorne, remember the quiet strength of the Pierce family. Hold your head high, protect your peace with absolute ferocity, and never apologize for protecting your own soul from those who seek to consume it. Stand firm in your truth, build your kingdom in silence, and let the sheer undeniable force of your success be the only noise you ever make. Please share this video with someone who needs a reminder of their own hidden strength and subscribe to our channel for more stories of ultimate justice.